So call to order the select board meeting on November 12th at 6:30 PM. Devin, can you hear us? We're gonna make sure we're live and in living color before I continue. Yep, I was just making sure we can hear us. Call to order, yep, and now let's pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alrighty, we have a quorum. Meeting's called to order at 6:30. Everyone is in attendance. Before we even get into real quick amendment to agenda, I just want to bring the special town meeting to fruition here and get this done right away. So we are going to hold a special town meeting on November 19th at 6:45, and we need to make a motion to hold that meeting so we can put out the notice. That's the process, correct? Yeah. So I would accept a motion to state that town meeting starts November 19th at 6:45 PM at the Eureka Center.
So moved.
And do I have a second?
Second.
We'll give it to Joe because I heard him first. Perfect. All right, any discussion on the motion?
Should we include in the motion what the meeting is about?
Yeah, that's a good point. Battery energy storage system warrant article for a special town meeting. And it is to consider putting a moratorium on battery storage for 6 months. So, any other questions on the motion?
It'll be ran by the planning board?
No, we will run that, and then we choose a moderator to preside at the meeting, and then we only have, that's the first article. The second article is just to open the discussion. We'll open the discussion on Article 2 to see if the town will vote to adopt the main moderator's manual rules of procedure. If we vote yes, then we move to the moratorium, and then we can go and vote on the moratorium and to enact it. So. Any other questions?
Yeah, what does Article 3 says to elect a moratorium?
That's, yeah. Is Kristen's gonna be? Yeah, that's how she said to do the articles. I'm not sure exactly why. We can get some clarification there. I think we're saying that we want to establish a moratorium, and then Article 4 would be that the ordinance, or is entitled Moratorium Ordinance Battery Energy Storage System. We vote to enact it. Does it make sense?
Not to me, but
And I'm not sure why
Yeah, well, I
we
mean,
have it separated.
yeah, I'm not sure either. It was prepared by town council, and so my thought process was to just operate under their recommendations. Did they say anything to you, Jerry, about that? No?
And he sent it to her like that, and she said.
Okay,
She said it was fine.
cool. Well, it works for me. We can just clarify with her
Yep.
when she gets here. But I want to get this done before 6:45 tonight, so we have to meet the 7-day deadline. So. Any other questions? All right, all in favor? Any opposition? All right, seeing none, we'll enact it, and Jessica can put the notice up right now. Do you just need the one copy signed?
it's 3.
3, okay.
Yeah, I just don't know what you'll be talking about then. Let's put a wire up there. There's another one. Oh.
3. Wind blowing? I'm already signed that one too. Alrighty. Next, we're gonna open up the, well, do we have any more amendments to the agenda? All right, next we're going to go into public comment, which we're gonna limit to 3 minutes per person. And this is a time period for anyone who wants to give us any feedback on anything or any comments. Yep, cool. All we need you to do is state your name and the street you live on, and then you get your public comment, and we'll mark it all down. So,
Deborah Larrabee,
you.
Royalsboro Road, Durham. And my question is, I have 2 concern forms in that are going on 90 days.
so we don't do questions during the public comment period. It's just public comment.
Well, that's what I'm commenting on.
Okay.
Is to let you know, I have 2 concerns that are almost 90 days old with
Mhm.
no response. And I just need more information at some point, how those work, because if you're gonna file them in to the board and then not get any response, what good are they?
Mhm.
So I'm just waiting on that, and then I'm also waiting on a cemetery response for the Durham Sawyer Cemetery. It hasn't been on the agenda since October 8th, and I'm wondering when that would be brought up, and if I'm still here and not gone to Florida, I'd like to attend.
Okay, well, thank you for the public comment.
Okay,
Much appreciated.
thank you.
Do we have any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'll move into old business. The only thing we have on old business is to vote on Jerry's review and compensation adjustment. We had an executive session last meeting where we discussed what we felt would be the appropriate compensation for Jerry in light of his annual review, and we conducted his annual review in public in the executive session. But any sort of changes to that compensation would have to be done in a public session, and so we're just going to have that vote on that this evening. Based off of the stellar review that Jerry received from all of us, my recommendation would be to adjust Jerry's salary to take his vehicle stipend and roll it into his regular wage, and then give him a 6.4% annual increase for this year, backdated to the August period where we were intending to originally do the review. So we had to move it due to scheduling issues. So, does anyone want to make a motion?
So moved.
All right, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Yep. So do we have any questions on that? On the motion?
No question, but a comment.
Yeah.
Jerry, I just want to publicly say, people that I've spoken to have really talked about what a great job you're doing. You came in, this was years ago now, it seems like, but you came in and you started finding ways to save money. You're still working on finding ways to save money, coming up with ideas, getting grants, doing things, that likely will never come to fruition, but give us talking points and ideas and discussions about things. I know we can't compete with some of the bigger towns and cities salary-wise, and so I know there's always greener pastures out there. But I just want to say, for me, from what I've seen from our discussions, I think you're doing a great job, and thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Yeah, Josh stole my thunder there, Jerry. Gonna kind of publicly say the same thing. I think that one thing we've been impressed by is your initiative to go find solutions, like, with the moving of our funds to, generate 150% more interest this year. That alone is huge, and finding new service providers to save us money and increase user efficiency on some of the software for the town not only saves money and makes the job go smoother, but also makes the staff happier in that regard too, which is just hugely impactful. So I can speak for myself, but I think the rest of the board, when I say we genuinely appreciate everything you've done for Durham and continue to do. So we're happy to keep you here. So
Thank you so much.
does anybody else have any questions or comments? All right, seeing none, I will take a vote on the motion. All in favor? Any opposition? All right, seeing none. New business. We've already moved the signing of the special meeting warrant into, above the new business line, or old business line, so we need to discuss the town office generator. Jerry?
Yes, so last meeting I gave you some quotes. Did you get them in your packet?
Yes.
Okay, so we have two quotes. And this is if you're even ready to do it at this time, but at least you have the information. So Milton Cat put in a quote to replace the generator for $59,250. And Electrical Systems put in an estimate to replace the generator for $22,800. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at these.
Jerry, could we just, for the record, summarize what the issue is with the generator over there? Just
Yeah.
for the-
Yeah, it's old, you can't get parts for it, it hasn't worked for a couple of years. It went through the CIP process, but didn't make the cut, a couple of years ago. And since then, we've probably lost power, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, and they're kinda dead in the water when it happens.
Yeah,
Especially last year with that long multi-day power outage.
So, it's and it's up to you folks, but I think it's important to have a generator that works at the town office during business hours. Electrical Systems, you just can't, they're gone in that particular machine. It's been looked at, it's been diagnosed, can't get the parts. So it really is going after a new one.
okay.
And we went out to bid, we've called, and this is what we've
Yeah.
got.
I mean, I'm sure you already know this from your line of work, but you only need, manufacturers only need to maintain replacement parts for 10 years, and the
Yes.
generator's over 20 years old. And so, the fixed option isn't an option anymore. And so I think our only options are replace it or go without.
So we've gotten a grant from MMA for $3,000. It's their risk reduction grant, so we did get $3,000 that we can put towards this. It's a reimbursement grant. So we'd have to, fully pay for it up front, and then they would reimburse us $3,000.
It's a huge differential.
Yeah.
Look at essentially this.
Heather, one second. Heather, you had a question?
Can you just refresh my memory where we're talking about having this come out of? Was it the buildings capital? Is that what?
Yes, and you have your sheet, right, with the
Yeah.
fund balances in them? So you have buildings capital right now with $70,866 that you could authorize.
Josh, did you have a question or comment? Or
No, I just-
Joe, you as well? The one you-
It was a differential in both cost and then power
Mhm.
consumption, so they,
Yeah. Yeah, we talked about that last meeting about, the Milton Cat is a larger generator, but, would be more than what the town office needs. So the smaller generator would meet the needs. So with the Milton Cat, it would be kind of overbuilt for the space, which is an option we can discuss, or something that's more purpose built to cover the energy needs. And any other questions? Heather?
Well,
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the committed funds and where the potential to pay for these types of things, what lines. And the only other line that I'm looking at that I think would apply would be telecoms, but I don't know
I don't think
what the
telecoms would apply.
definition of that fund is.
Right.
No? Okay, we don't have to talk about it.
No.
Okay, thank you. At some point though, can we get a explanation of what telecoms has to be spent on?
Telecoms was part of your franchise
Right.
fees sort of thing, and the way you used to do it was you would use that towards specific, like your IT.
Yeah,
We don't do that anymore. We still get those franchise fees, but revenue is revenue. It doesn't really much matter what pocket you put it in.
Okay, let's put a pin in this
All
and
right.
talk about it
Yeah, it's a
another
diff-
time.
It's
Sorry.
a different scope of conversation. Well, so before anyone makes a motion, does anyone have a question on the specs of either one of these for Jerry, or how he got the information, or anything like that? You know, I had the same, in my mind, the same thing that I think is going through your mind, Joe, is when you see two different prices, it's like, oh, well, why is this one so much lower and this one so much more expensive? We talked about that a little bit, so I think that that's, our discussion last week has assuaged my concerns on that, and I would be comfortable with either one of these meeting our needs, so. That being, oh, yeah?
Sorry, what's the maintenance schedule and plan? Does Electrical Systems include any type of maintenance plan or warranty or anything like that in this number? Is that something that we can purchase separately to make sure that we're on a maintenance plan?
I'd have to, has a 7-year extended warranty, Electrical Systems. I'd have to go down through this and,
I think maintenance would have to be something that we are held responsible for, much like the generator here in the fire station. So I think we would need to get it installed first and then handle our maintenance, whether we schedule regular maintenance or sign a contract to have regular maintenance come out. But I don't think that either one of these quotes
Install. Maybe just a warranty.
I think this is just
Okay.
the price for the generator, the install price, and then they come with the, manufacturer warranty.
Cheap Trip is the one that
Yeah.
went after these as well.
Mhm.
These- And Electrical Systems Maine did the one here and did the one at Public Works.
Mhm. Yeah, and so with that being said, I move that we go with Electrical Systems of Maine's generator to provide our needs for the town office. Do I have a second?
Second?
Sure. All right, discussion on the motion.
I would, if we could just include that the money would come out of the.
Yeah, that's the only way we can pay for it is out of the reserve funds. And so I guess we can clarify that here. That's due to the fact that we have capital reserves now, and that the town has allowed the select board to make expenditures out of those for capital needs, like what this is right here. And so this became an emerging issue after the last town meeting, and since we've been losing power and stuff like that, so. It'll all be obviously documented and then reflected in this year's update, when we do our update on the capital reserves and.
And we
going into the
expended
town.
all the ARPA funds already? Are those all
Yeah,
accounted
last
for?
week,
Okay.
we voted to expend the remaining ARPA funds on the doors at the Eureka Center.
No, that's
Yeah.
fine. Just wanted to make sure that was used up.
Yeah, and so any other discussion on the motion of purchasing a generator from Electrical Systems of Maine? My only other comment is finding a grant to help offset the cost of it's really awesome, so. And when it's a generator that's $22,000, a grant covers over 10% of it, that's pretty nice, so.
When it gets reimbursed, does it go back into the capital reserve?
You can direct it there. It will just go into revenue at first, but we can redirect it if you.
Yeah, which I think would be wise, yeah. All right, any other questions on the motion? All in favor? Any opposition? All right, seeing none. Gonna get this going right away, winter's
Okay.
coming. So,
Okay.
I say that as I
Thank you.
stoke the wood stove. And I went without a generator last winter, and I think my wife might be making a similar proposal to the house's capital
Gonna get your rebate, huh?
funds, yeah, so.
Guess we pay for batteries.
Boom. Alrighty. The next is just, I put on here discussing the straw poll for adding law enforcement coverage. We had really good voter turnout, and that was at so we have a really good reflection, I can't help but notice we had 2,856 people vote on this, which is pretty awesome. We usually get 200 or less at a town meeting, so it's really, I feel like this is really getting the pulse of what people are thinking. To me, when we have 57% say no, they don't want us to pursue it any further, I think that gives us, in my mind, gives us our answer. I would be a little bit personally more concerned if we had received a different message from the sheriff. But when the sheriff was here, said, I think that you are all not in a position where it's an immediate need. It's something to think about in the long term. That, in conjunction with this survey response saying, not right now, we don't want it, I think that we can kind of button this up and say, not to put any more time or effort at this time into pursuing that. What do you folks think?
Yeah, I think the
I like-
message was clear.
I like receiving direct feedback and letting us know how to best spend our time, so.
Do we, if I can ask a question, do we have some kind of reporting structure that tells the town?
I think this would be a
what are-
good
How
news
many
blast thing.
calls, what are the response times? At least so we're keeping up on it, on that information at all. Is that something that we
Um,
want to think about?
So, in the past, in Chief's reports, he has included the call volume for
For the town?
for the town, and indicated to us if that is a increase or decrease from the same time the previous year, and then has also let us know the trend. So for certain medical calls, like he said, we might have been up 10% from last year, which was up 5% from the year before. And so Chief is keeping track of that, and it's in his reports to us. So we could just call that out during a meeting if you thought it was valuable for people to hear it. Now, any sort of police calls that are responded to by the sheriff, I think we'd have to ask them to provide us with that information quarterly. But it's something we could definitely, ask about.
Or even if it was in the annual report or something.
That's a good idea. Keep people informed.
And will we file this stuff, Jerry, do you think, like the results of this poll, plus the paperwork and the whole topic somewhere that we can get to later, or is it just within the records of the select board?
No, we can keep records of.
Yeah.
Maybe just of that topic.
Right.
Yeah, just have
In a
a,
folder, in a
Paperwork,
filing
yeah.
cabinet,
because I think
absolutely.
that'd be really helpful, because I know
'Cause
that
we'll
when
come
we
back
had,
again.
when this conversation came up, some folks said, oh, this was talked about X, Y, Z years ago, and I'm pretty sure that this was what was offered, and people didn't want it then, but it was kind of like a off the cuff, like, no, they offered us 8 hours a day. And it's like what was vocalized to me was something that they weren't offering now. And so I think it's a good idea to have kind of that
Yep.
in there, and it helps us trend to where our discussions are going.
It's all
Maybe under,
public record.
Yeah.
under the select board, maybe special topics or something, and then
Mhm.
the data can be filed right in there.
Yeah.
Just a thought. I
Yeah.
think it'd be-
I do think it would be valuable, because we did show the straw poll, thank you. It's been a long week, and I had yesterday off, so. That's what happens when you go hunting every single morning, but that's my own fault. The straw poll results, I think we've already posted, but I think what we can say is, maybe in a news blast or something, just a memo from us as a board, and I could write something up to say, we appreciate the public
Yeah.
feedback, and at this time, we're going to stop any continued discussion to pursue services. I think it would just be a good idea to put that out so people know. I mean, we're gonna talk about it in tonight's meeting, but this meeting was gonna go on for another hour,
Right,
and whether
right.
people are watching it or not. So I think this is a really good opportunity to say, we asked
Yeah,
for public
wrap it up.
input because we wanted public input, and we got it, and now we're going with you all.
We have
So-
data to drive our decision.
Yeah, so, I can write a memo up, just real brief, to send to Jerry. And then, we can get that maybe put in the news blast or on the town's social media page or whatever. So I think it's just good communication.
Yeah, sure.
And
right.
probably an official response to the sheriff's office and Officer McGee.
Yeah, I think that would be,
Let them
nice. We can let them know we appreciate their time, but
Yeah.
at this point, we're gonna, hold off. Alrighty, any other question about the straw poll for adding law enforcement coverage? 25 minutes in, we're already in the back page of the agenda, that's pretty good.
Don't blow it, keep going.
Alright, discussion on the budget schedule. Did you have anything you wanted here to add, Jerry, before I?
Well, no,
Chat?
you just go and then.
Yeah,
I have
so-
something later on.
I'd like for us, this is gonna be a I shouldn't say confusing, it's gonna be a different budget this year because we're doing an 18-month budget. And so numbers are just going to, there's not gonna be a lot of comparing apples to apples budget line from last year to this year. And so I would really like for us to, get a handle on that sooner than later. And so, Jerry and I had just briefly discussed looking at getting a lot of our other issues, or not issues, a lot of our other tasks here buttoned up in December, and so we can just focus on the budget after that and get work early on it. Did you have anything you wanted to add there, Jerry?
Ideally, it would be nice to get the budget to the budget committee by February first week of February, so we can do our due diligence the month of January. That would be super. The department heads and myself have been working on the budget. We're pretty close, to where the budget, we still got some fine tuning to do. But we want to see where the actuals come in, and those really won't be in until the middle of January when we close the books. So we'll actually be able to fine tune it as we're working on it. But we should get started on it sooner than that and enjoy the actuals, because after this, we won't have actuals to work with at all. Because we'll be putting together a budget in March. Town meeting is going to be in June, and we're still working on that budget before it passes, so it's going to be a little
Well,
different.
town meeting's in April.
Hmm?
With the
It
new,
will-
well,
It
sorry.
will be
Oh,
new,
gosh,
right?
yeah. Yeah.
Once we get this budget complete and we start working on the next one, it'll be like in the
Yeah.
months of March and April to
Yeah.
pass in June, and we're still working on that same budget.
But
So-
either way, we figured that, they're already working on it. If we can, have something ready, so when those actuals start coming in, you can kind of just plug and play there. Then we can have a quick turnaround in mid-January to get something in front of the budget committee for February, the beginning of February, and give them time. And we can alert the chair or the budget committee of that as well.
We're almost going to want to schedule a workshop, because I'm going to have a bunch of questions for the board to weigh in on.
Would you want ahead of your budget to us?
Before January, I'd like to have maybe like a budget workshop sometime at the end of December, at the very latest, the beginning
Well,
of January.
Rather than going very latest, why don't we, so I'm assuming we're not gonna meet December 24th.
Right.
Really?
No, I got a sleigh to ride, but, maybe we could look at doing that do you wanna do that the first meeting of December, Jerry, or the second meeting? I mean, we're gonna need to talk about our December meeting schedule anyways.
Right.
But if we did a December 3rd meeting and a December 17th meeting, or a December 10th meeting, and December 17th meeting, either way there, that gives you a half week in December before the holiday week, and then the half week.
I like the December 17th
Yeah.
meeting. And you can keep your December 10th meeting at your regular scheduled meeting.
And then, because it's the week before holiday season, we could just say December 17th is just a budget workshop between the select board and the town manager
And department heads.
and the department heads.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say that would be a short meeting, but it's not, so. Either way, and then that just sets you up for turnaround in January, and then
Right.
if we can then be looking at the January 28th meeting as lock the budget in on our side, because if you can come back to us on the January 14th meeting, we make those adjustments. January 28th meeting, budgets, you give it to us, and the budget's then the select boards.
Okay, so January 14th is, what do you,
That would be when we get your first
the first presentation?
look at it,
Yep,
because hopefully actuals will be
it'll be,
pretty close by
yeah.
then.
Yep,
I know, like last year, we always have like a, hey, maybe adjust this, maybe adjust that, and then January 28th, we can take it and accept it as the final, and then hand it off for the February.
Can I ask some
Sure.
clarifying questions? So, just so that I understand the timeline, so select board, January, budget committee, February, finalize.
Well, first, sorry, let me interject. December 6th,
Yes, I got that,
17th,
yeah.
workshop.
Yeah.
January 14th will be our first review of the town manager's recommendations and the department heads. January 28th would be, we'll probably have recommendations for the 14th. January 28th will be all right, this is, all things, barring any unforeseen circumstance, January 28th, we're adopting that as our budget, and then giving it to,
The budget
The
committee
budget
in
committee.
February, and then they'll send it back to us when they're done. We get one more review of it, that would be March.
that's how it's gone in the past.
it's gonna be
couple
early
years.
March, because we gotta get it posted, and,
And then
Mhm.
town meeting will still be April this year.
yes.
Mhm.
And the
Or
budget,
5th, I think.
the budget that we're working on is an 18-month budget that will cover from January 2025 to
Yep.
June 30th, 30 days, has September, April, June 30th, 2026.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
The 17th is at 6:30. Can we do it earlier?
Yeah, yeah, do we wanna have that chat right now? Because I'm just looking at our, schedule, and obviously we would normally be the 10th and the 24th, so, the 17th, we could do our meeting earlier if you'd like, or if other people would like.
Doesn't matter.
On the 17th, it'll get dark at, 2:15 in the afternoon anyway, so it's not
5:30?
like. Does 5:30 work for folks?
Make it work.
Is that too early? We could do 6. I just
No,
thought you'd
it's-
wanna go early.
No,
5:30?
it's fine.
Okay.
All right, can I get a motion to move the December 24th select board meeting to December 6th, 17th at 5:30 PM?
So moved.
All right, do I have a second?
I'll second.
Perfect. Any discussion? All right, all in favor? All right, seeing no opposition, we've moved that meeting, and that is going to be a budget focus. So, and by workshop, what I mean is it's an opportunity for the select board to work with Jerry and the department heads to ask them questions on their budget and make recommendations to them. So we will, we'll have to figure out the framework of that before, if it's just a workshop, we might not even do a public comment, it'll just be a workshop. But if it's like a regular meeting where we do public comment, that'll be before, and then there won't be questions from anyone else besides us to you all, so.
Question.
Yeah,
How do the budget needs come up for committees, if there's anything?
That's a great question.
like
Or how does
the,
it fit into what we're doing, what we just
you,
said?
like the, like
Any committee?
any of the town committees, yeah, they usually submit, a budget, correct?
The only one that's really submitted a budget has been the historic district.
Yeah, and the Conservation Commission used to submit a small budget when they were, for things like, tools and lumber for maintaining trails and stuff like that, but that all kind of went by the wayside.
I think we should send each committee head some form or something that's, and have them officially come back and say they don't need anything, or they do anticipate.
Yeah,
Budget
I
needs.
could do that ahead, December 17th, jeez, it's already a month out.
We'd have to do it.
Yeah, next week, Jerry, let's you and I work on if you have any sort of like draft thing that you send to the department heads about any special needs or anything like that they might have. All right, well, I can just pull together something that we can send as a board to the committees and just say, you know, if you have any budget needs, please submit them before December 17th to the select board,
Yeah, I mean, those
and we
used-
can bring those up.
And a lot of those used to go to CIP
Mhm.
beforehand, right? So we would have already had like those committees submit anything through CIP, which
Yeah.
we're not doing. So those would probably just go just to you, Jerry, and then you roll them into whatever capital.
It should go to Jerry, not to
Yeah,
us.
not to us.
I thought for the, oh yeah, for the committees, it would go, yes, sorry, because it's a budget, it would go to Jerry,
Yeah.
yeah. So do you want to just pull together a very brief email that just says, if you have budget needs or requests, please submit them to,
Yeah, just to clarify, what would the committees request in capital instead of
I
operating?
mean, that's how we were doing it, is through capital, right? So CIP, we had we had our form that we'd send out to the committees, and if they had any capital to it, because really, I mean, most of their expenses would be capital if they're gonna do a project. So, you know, I don't care what it is, build a new bandstand, whatever, historical district wants to paint a building, whatever it is, it would be a capital project that would go on through the committees, more than them needing office supplies or something like that, you know?
So the capital group had a form that we
They,
could
they
pull
had,
out?
they had a form that we would make all the departments even fill out, for their capital expenditures for the year, whether it be a truck or ambulance or whatever.
yeah, and then it would get ranked.
And then, but even the Historic District Commission would submit a form for, say, the church at the time. So it would all be a capital-driven request from those committees, more than like I say, like a operating budget per se, right? It's not really an operating budget.
Heather?
I think along the lines of what Jerry might be asking and what Debbie might be saying is that, let's say a committee like the Solid Waste Committee wants to do a public outreach type of thing. They may need money to be able to pull materials together, to be able to do that type of stuff. And that to me is not a capital expense, so I don't think we should pigeonhole it there. I think you should just maybe reach out and ask committees if they have any budgetary requirements, and then you are the one who vets what lane they're going in.
Yeah, well, I was just gonna say is I think that the nature of their budget request would dictate where it would go. So if someone's like, you know, the Conservation Commission wants to build a new bike rack at a park, that's a different conversation than we need a budget for printing materials or you know, just basic functions of the committee. So I think that's where people would give you their needs, wishes, and wants, and then you would determine where those would fall, and then that comes to us, and we make the determination there, you know.
Just look at the CIP form, it would
Yeah.
cover you in all instances,
Yeah.
'cause it's.
Is that
already
something
pretty-
that works for you, Jerry? Yeah. And I think that it doesn't need to be a big back and forth or anything like that, just hey, submit your request for our consideration, so. All right, any other questions here on, it feels crazy that we're already at this part of the year. But any other questions on the budget schedule? All right, seeing none. I put on here topics to discuss for upcoming select board meetings.
Yeah, I have I printed out a list for you.
Oh, cool, yeah.
You can look at that.
Is Kristen only here for the F on the agenda? I think that we should do an amendment to the agenda so that is she staying for anything else?
No,
Because this feels like this could be a long discussion.
sure.
in the effort of-
Let's move discussion / training with the town attorney above the discussion of the budget schedule, and, I mean, the topics for upcoming select board meeting. So you don't have to watch us go through all that. Thanks for catching that, Heather. Does that work for folks?
I didn't hear what you guys were talking about.
We're gonna move our discussion / training with the town attorney to before topic discussions for upcoming select board meetings, to be respectful of our time.
On the back page, moving even.
No, on the agenda, Joe.
Here.
No, okay.
Did you say you would take a motion?
Sure,
So moved, or you want me to say it?
make a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to move 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / 3 / 2 / 5 / F ahead of 5E, out of respect for the town attorney's time.
Second? Any discussion on the motion? All in favor? Any opposition? Seeing none? All right, perfect. It's all you now then. So, Jerry, do you want to kick this off a little bit with the objectives here?
Just, you know,
Wherever you want.
Yeah, sure. I had asked Kristen if she would come in and kind of do a little bit of training on the board. I know Debbie's new to the select board, and it's always good to kind of get a refresher on roles and responsibilities and relationships between your role, my role, boards and committees, and that sort of thing. FOA. I think Kristen's going to do a little FOA exercise with us. So, just so, I'm not sure how many of you have taken your FOA lately, but you're gonna get a condensed version of that right now, today. So just to kind of get you up to speed, but it's always a good idea to get a refresher on these sort of things. And certainly if you're new, to kind of get an attorney's perspective and expertise on local
Yeah.
government, so.
Well, I think one thing too, really, we can all learn from is, municipal government in general, municipal government is just so different than the private sector and the business, and I think it's easy for us all to kind of be like, why does this take so long? Why does it have to go like this? And this is we're gonna learn the why, and I think a lot of the why are associated with lessons learned from when people didn't follow the why. So
And it gives you an opportunity too to ask questions,
Mhm.
from a legal perspective.
yeah, but perfect.
So,
Okay.
Yeah,
take it away.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I hope we're less intimidating than your normal audiences, right? So
You know, you never know what happens at a town meeting until you get through it. Okay, so first off, this was sort of designed to be really focused on form of government, interaction with different town boards, the town manager, staff, things like that. And I'm trying to make this sort of Durham specific. I think this should be a complement to the MMA Municipal Officers Training, which I really encourage you all to do. Jerry and I were looking at the schedule for that, and it looks like the next one was the 19th, right? So there's already a select board meeting that night. And then after that, we didn't see any until the new year. So if you want to talk about anything more generally, great, just throw a question at me. But my agenda predominantly is, so let's talk about roles and responsibilities, and then I'll finish up with just enough FOA training so you can sign your certificates and be done with that without having to go do something separate. Okay, so start off with select board, town meeting, town manager form of government, which Durham is, and that's a relatively new thing for you all, which I had not realized until recently. So there can tend to be some growing pains or changing pains with that I think can make things a little bit more complicated in a town where you're used to the select board kind of doing everything. So it's good for the select board in the sense that you don't have to do everything because you have Jerry. Sometimes it can be frustrating, like Joe sort of alluded to, of, I just want to get my hands dirty and get something done, but there are protocols and expectations that kind of make that difficult sometimes. So to start off with, think of it as a legislative, administrative, executive kind of a system. And you've got town meeting, which is your legislative body, that the select board, granted, is the threshold about what goes to town meeting vote, unless there are citizens petitions. But, the legislation is coming from town meeting and town meeting only. That means everything that is the execution of a long-term contract, the appropriation of money, the full budget, ordinances, pretty much everything under the sun, start with the presumption that town meeting has the authority unless it's delegated to the select board or the town manager. I've recently had a case where a town board was threatened with a lawsuit from a neighbor saying, we think we own this piece of property, and the select board, being afraid of a lawsuit, just signed a deed
to release the property so they could avoid the lawsuit. That was illegal because only a town meeting can make grants or gifts or convey property unless town meeting has given some sort of an authorization in these kind of situations to the select board. So legislative body. Executive body, now this is where it gets a little bit trickier sometimes. Think of your town manager in most respects as the CEO of the company being the town of Durham. So it is expected that on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis, most of the decisions of running this place do come down to the town manager. All of the administration of the departments, all of the administration of personnel, staff, roles, responsibilities, assignments, that is all coming through Jerry to all of the individuals that work for and are appointed for this town. So on a day-to-day basis, the select board, unlike in a town where you don't have a town manager, the select board should not have to be doing anything except listening to your constituents, conveying issues to Jerry, asking questions of Jerry if they have bearing on your meetings and what you intend to work on and decide in your meetings. But for the most part, your town manager is the place where everything kind of filters through. And it's his job to make assignments of duties, go out and find your bids for contracts, evaluate, decisions, administer decisions. And again, the select board's job really is to be the conduit of policy and information. So you take select board, or you take the town meeting authorizations and any other new ideas and concepts that you want to bring, and you filter them through the town manager. It's the town manager's job to get everything done. So areas where there can be pinch points. I would say number one, personnel, and in a couple of different ways. So one way where there can be stress is if you have town employees who come to you with complaints either about their day-to-day work, their managers, their supervisors, or the town manager himself. It is generally speaking not appropriate for the select board to be having individual discussions with individual town employees about their roles, responsibilities, objections, concerns, any of that stuff, up to a point. Okay, so I'm going to use, I decided to frame all of my hypotheticals around codes for no reason at all, not to say that there's any stress, it's just a way we can be kind of narrow focused here. So let's say your code enforcement officer is frustrated because he feels he doesn't have enough support. He needs some sort of administrative assistant or assistant code enforcement officer, and he's overloaded with work, and Jerry won't listen to him, and he wants to come to one of the select board members to complain about that. The appropriate response in that case is, you have to bring these concerns to Jerry. I cannot help you. I am just one select board member. I am not your boss. And it is only when you as an individual board member start to see that Jerry is not responding to that employee's concerns and that things are breaking down in the code office, that you now have to think about, okay, what do I do next with this? The remedy doesn't lie with kind of trying to work things out directly with the staff member. What you would want to do is put it on an agenda item, usually for an executive session in that case, because now we're not talking about the code enforcement officer's roles or responsibilities. We're talking about Jerry's roles and responsibilities. So if you had a concern that he's not properly managing the department, then that's a little bit different. Now we're talking about the town manager, and because you are the boss of the town manager, it's completely appropriate for you to have a conversation in executive session, or if it's sort of a more benign topic, You know, we're concerned about workflow and are we giving codes the right tools they need to get things done quickly? You know, those kind of conversations don't need to be an executive session if it's more of a process thing. If it's more of a management style and accountability kind of thing, then it's an executive session issue. Okay, so definitely be wary of these kinds of conversations with staff. I have seen, you know, usually it's the select board member who wants to be helpful, wants to be the listening ear. They're around the town office a lot. People know them well, that get themselves into trouble because it's just like a random conversation you have in the hall that develops into complaints. Now you're the recipient of those complaints, and what do you do with them?
Can I ask a process question about this? If we have a question directly about what you're speaking about right now, do we ask it now or do we wait
Oh
until
yeah,
we're
just
finished?
butt right in.
Okay, so this is about the thing where if we were gonna have an executive session to talk with Jerry about maybe a breakdown in a department or something like that. It's been my understanding that the board acts as a whole. And so if I, let's just say, I was to ask for an agenda item, but I haven't talked to my board yet to make sure that we're all on the same page about that before we would go into an executive session to have that. I might be the only one who's feeling that way. And if we're supposed to act as a whole, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I would say rely heavily on the chair in those situations. So if you have a concern, and this isn't just for this issue, for any issue that you want brought to the board, I would suggest talking to the chair, saying, I have this concern. I would like to call an agenda item to talk about it in executive session or otherwise. When it comes to matters about, you know, what should be on the agenda, I have no problem with Joe then calling the other select board members and saying, Heather wanted to talk about this issue. Is there a consensus that we should at least have an agenda item about it? Or he also has the latitude as the chair to just put it on the agenda. Yeah.
So I just want to make sure I understand, because like, obviously, there might be times where like someone might want, I'm not saying there's
It's fine,
an
you can
example,
start-
but let's say Heather calls and says, I want to put something on the agenda because this employee is problematic or something like that, and someone like myself goes, I don't think it's a concern, or I say, sure, I'll put that on that, but I do want to call individual board members and say, hey, is this Heather wants to put this on the agenda, it's an executive session, and Josh says, it's not a big deal, don't put it on there. Deb says, it's not a big deal, don't put it on there. Joe says, oh yeah, it's a huge deal, don't put it on there. How do you go about making that determination? Because at that point, there's like a deliberation and it's in a discussion outside of a meeting as to whether it should even be put on. I don't anticipate this happening. If someone says, I really think this needs to go on pronto, my inclination is always going to be, sure, get it on if it's that important. But I like to think about scenarios that I hope don't happen and know how to react there.
Yeah,
So.
I think the way that gets resolved is through you and your authority as chair to set the agenda.
Okay.
So you're not really pulling the audience to.
It's more just saying, hey, this is going to be on, so come prepared.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're not looking for a majority vote to put it on necessarily, but you're just kind of informing your own judgment about whether it should be on.
Okay.
And if one board member, you know, really wants this agenda item and the rest are like, oh, you know, this would be harmful to talk about, we're not ready to talk about it, whatever it is, then I would think you in your discretion would say, you know, to the person raising the issue, it's just, there's not board interest in discussing this right now, and hopefully they would understand.
Okay.
No, that's a really good point. And then let's also, so, you know, in general, if you are the person who ends up being the subject of an employee complaint, not the subject, but, you know, the person who receives it, what I would want you to do is to encourage the employee to go straight to Jerry. You know, give your apologies and just say that it's, you know, it's not my role as a select board member to work with you on this. You really do need to go to Jerry. That's step one. The other thing that you could and should probably do is just let Jerry know that you've had that conversation, that that person came to you. Now, sometimes they may come to you and say, this is confidential, I don't want anybody to know about this, but.
That's what I say. Stop right there.
Exactly.
I don't want to hear
Yep,
it.
stop at the but, preferably. But you can't always respect an employee's request for confidentiality. You know, we have protocols here. And unfortunately, if they engage the wrong protocol by coming straight to you, that may break the chain there where you have a responsibility just within the structure of the government to take it to the town manager.
What about in scenarios where someone has, again, I hate using hypotheticals like
I
this
know.
because we don't have this issue, but a scenario where someone is saying, the town manager is discriminating against me or treating me poorly in the workplace or harassing me or whatever, or they're like, that is an issue that I'm not going to go to the town manager about, and they come to an individual board member. Is that when we just say, all right, we're going to have an executive session with them?
Absolutely. I was just about to touch on that issue too, because I've had it happen like 2 or 3 times in the last year with different clients, where some employee comes to a member of a select board or a council and wanting to make some sort of complaint about discrimination or harassment. If it is about my department head, people I work with, all of that should be reported to Jerry. Jerry will work with me to handle it. In the very unlikely event that it were about Jerry himself, then I think you can't involve him directly, and that's why you have me. So I would hope that whoever it is that's received the complaint would let Joe know, and probably the 2 of you would come to me together, and then we figure out what we do next. And usually what we end up doing next is there's some sort of an investigation. And that's the case whether it's a complaint that ends up going to Jerry to work with me to investigate, or it's a complaint about Jerry that the board's coming to me to investigate. Usually we have somebody else, not me, from my firm, do that investigation if it involves the town manager. Sometimes if it's just, a employee on an employee situation, Jerry might ask the questions with my guidance, and that's the investigation. Okay. In any situation where it comes back to the town manager in terms of there being some performance issue, discrimination, whatever the allegation is, it's really important that the board function as a board and not kind of break into factions, and that from the very moment an issue is raised, we start talking about it as a board in executive session. And the town manager does not always have to be in those executive sessions. So we'll talk about that in a little bit with the FOA stuff. But unless there's a specific charge or complaint or an accusation against the town manager, the board is free to have executive session discussions without him present. So that would be from run-of-the-mill performance questions to raises and reviews and all of that stuff. You are able to conduct that as a board and feel like you have, confidentiality amongst yourselves, and they're really only responsibilities to bring the affected employee here, Jerry, in if it is a charge or an accusation.
So does that mean, like, if, let's say, Josh has an issue with something that I'm doing and he his complaint could negatively impact my character and how it's viewed in the town, but he doesn't want Jerry to be part of an internal discussion the board's having about a board member's behavior or whatever. He could say, I'd like to have an executive session to talk about board member behavior, but I do not want the manager to be there. Is that a time when the manager's...
So the town manager attends your select board meetings by custom, and that usually involves executive sessions too, because there's no reason to leave them out. There might be a case where you just need to hash some stuff out, and it just will work best just among the board. And those cases, yeah, sure, you could have an executive session of the board.
Okay.
And the hook there, it is, if it's talking about a particular member of the board and the discussion has the risk of harming that person's reputation, or revealing personal information. Those kinds of things can be done in executive session. And the same goes for any discussions the board might have about the town manager. So if it's about confidential personnel stuff, if there's anything that might be harmful to his reputation, or just generally, more of a private matter.
Okay.
Heather, you had a question?
I just wanted to make sure that I understood correctly, that if the board wanted to have a discussion, and we're talking about, because you said about performance, we're only discussing anything that would have to do with Jerry's performance. We're not having an executive session without Jerry to talk about any other town employee's
No,
performance. Okay, I just wanted
absolutely
to make
not.
sure that that was clear.
The select board should not be having an executive session to talk about any person's performance other than the town manager.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for
Period.
clarifying.
If we did get a complaint from a town employee, but there was a department head level between, I mean, would we say you need to talk to your department head your department
It
head?
depends. If the complaint is about the department head, then I would encourage that employee to go to the town manager.
Okay,
If it's more like the employee is just grumbling about something that's going on in their department, then you would encourage them to go to the department head.
and are we obligated at any time if we hear a complaint from a town employee to bring it to Joe? So the select board knows, or?
No,
can-
I wouldn't bring it to Joe, because again, I don't think it's select board business. But I do think it's fair to let Jerry know
Okay.
that I was cornered in the hallway by a town employee in Public Works, and they were complaining about
Gotcha.
whatever,
Okay.
unsafe
Good to know.
equipment.
Okay.
I encourage them to talk to the supervisor, but just in case that doesn't happen, I wanted to let you know. Okay.
And is
so-
it best for those sorts of conversations to be done in writing? So like if someone comes and complains to me about a safety concern that they don't feel is being addressed at the fire department, and I say, well, you should go talk to chief, and then I send Jerry an email, say, hey, so-and-so came to me and said there was an issue, and I just sent them to chief. Is it better to do that written, so it establish some sort of record?
Yeah, I mean, I like that, when there's any risk of liability, if
Yeah.
it's something about discrimination or harassment, I don't need you to put the entire substance of what somebody told you in writing, but to a little summary and pass it on so that there's the chain of communication would be good. Like in the event of the unsafe equipment, and you refer
That
them
was
to their
exactly what I was
supervisor,
thinking
and that
about.
conversation never happens, nothing ever comes of it, at least you've done your part by memorializing that you took the next step.
And the town manager's role at a meeting is to answer questions if they have them. I mean, what's
Town manager's role at the meeting, I would say, is, well, I'll skip ahead in my own agenda to talk about agendas, and then we'll get into how the meeting goes. So, I think the town manager's job in terms of preparing for the meeting is to obviously think about the things that require board action within the next period of time, or board discussion, because you need feedback or direction. And I believe you two have agenda setting meetings, is that right?
Yeah.
Yep. Which is pretty standard and appropriate. And the select board chair may have additional things that he brings to the table that he's heard from the board on and wants to discuss, kind of like we just alluded to. And the two of you form the agenda together. It's the town manager's job, I think, to bring to the table for that meeting anything that needs to be discussed, make sure you have all of your packets and all of the information you need to rely on to make your decisions at the meeting. And at the meeting itself, the agenda should already have been set. So the town manager really should be here to help the chair facilitate the meeting in the sense of providing all the right information at the right time, answering any questions, taking any action items for the town manager, and making sure that he knows what he's supposed to do and he's got clarity about what he's supposed to follow up on. That makes sense. But it would be unusual and inappropriate, of course, to expect the town manager to run the meeting. Okay. Interactions with staff, any other questions or issues there?
I want to clarify, especially when it was my first year on the board, I wanted to understand a lot I wanted information. And so there was a lot of back and forth about whether or not it was appropriate for me to be asking town staff questions, information, to gain understanding. I was never directing their work at all, but I wanted to be able to access information from them. And so where, in my mind, we landed with that was that we're allowed to ask like questions like that to get information, but that if the town employee feels like we're utilizing too much of their time, that direction needs to come from the board to be researching something or to be getting information for us, or that request needs to be brought to Jerry for Jerry to be, because we also don't want to eat up their man hours, right, when they have other stuff to work on. And so, people hours, sorry. So I just want to make sure that I have like a legal understanding of not crossing a line of where it's directing a town employee's work versus getting information that we're allowed to get. I want
Yeah.
to make sure I understand that clearly.
You summarized that perfectly. So take it back to the codes example. Let's say a constituent asks you, what's going on with that property over there? I'm concerned that I haven't seen anything on the agenda about it. Okay, you have two options, I think. Option one, which is probably the best option, is to tell the person, just contact codes office, they'll give you information. Option two is you can ask the question of codes, hey, was there a permit recently issued for this property, what for? Or can you send me the application? All of that stuff I think is fine, because it's the kind of thing that the code enforcement officer would expect from John Q. Public when they walk through the door asking a question. And just because you're a select board member, I don't think you have to take that hat off. And those simple questions where it's just like a one-off, yep, here's the answer, here's the document, I think that's fine. But then, let's say he gives you that application and you look at it and it feels like, whoa, this is inadequate to get what they got in terms of a permit. How come you didn't ask this question and this question and this question? Yeah, John Q. Public might ask those questions too, but when you start asking leading questions that are sort of in the vein of criticism, now you're acting a little bit more in a supervisory role. And that's where it gets really uncomfortable for the staff. And then amplify that, multiply that times 5 people who could be doing the same thing. And I've absolutely seen staff members quit because they're getting too much pressure, even just from one select board member or counselor. Much less a culture where that's just the way everybody functions and people are always asking questions of staff, and it does get too much to handle, and you can't have 5 bosses, it just doesn't work. So yes, simple questions, simple requests for information. Let's say your request is, I'm just curious, it seems like it's been really busy in code office. Could you, give me a report of how many permits were issued for this, this, and this in the last year as compared to the prior year? You absolutely can't do that of the CEO directly. If you're concerned about this as a select board policy type issue, the right thing to do would be to, I think, send an email to Joe and Jerry and say, I'd like to have a discussion about this as an upcoming meeting. Something that I think would be helpful to have as background would be, and then you would ask Jerry if he could work with codes to provide that for an upcoming meeting.
But that's, I think, too, where like someone could just say, hey, I've gotten a lot of requests about A, B, and C. Maybe a solution could be X, Y, and Z, but rather than going directly to a member or something, you could just go to say, let's bring it up as a topic for discussion as a board.
Yes.
That's kind of, in that way, it relieves the pressure from someone feeling like, oh, the select board's asking me all this stuff. And so the option, you gave the 2 options of like, say, just send the person to codes, or option 2, just go ask codes. How do we make sure that we never feel like we're putting too much pressure? Because if all of a sudden, I know we're using codes for a million examples here, but if all of a sudden our code enforcement officer says, yeah, I got 7 emails this week and it said, Joe Roy told me to ask you if I have this question. And now he's going, it's not Joe harassing me, but he's sending everybody to me. How do we make sure it doesn't turn into like, yeah, I spent a whole day just answering emails that came from Joe or from people Joe sent my way,
Yeah.
Because especially when I see instances, and I see this in my personal life, my professional life as well, it's like all of a sudden someone gets inundated with 150 form emails that are all copy and pasted by the same thing, and now their inbox is just full of that stuff. Like, how do we make sure we're preventing those sorts of,
Yeah. well,
remaining appropriate in those sorts of things?
There's one scenario there where it's like the select board member as activist is out there drumming up opposition or support about a particular topic, and so they're like, I'm concerned about this. If you're concerned about this, write the planning board or write the codes office and let them know you oppose them. That, I think, that type of politicking, when it has that bad impact on staff, is problematic. It's not like it's illegal to do it, but it's just stressful,
None of us
concerning.
operate that way.
Yeah, I'm not saying we
know,
are, but I just wanna
it
make sure
could,
we're still.
yeah, I mean, but it could happen. So that's one thing, but then the other thing is sort of the incidental. I've been peppered with questions from people this week, and I don't want to do the work and try to answer them, so I'm just going to send them all to so-and-so.
Yeah.
And, you're never going to know for sure when a staff member's inundated. I think you always just start from the premise that they probably are, because they're busy. And,
So maybe a
Just be
policy
mindful.
we could have is like, if you're getting a bunch of the same, if a bunch of constituents if 5 constituents this week come up and say, what's going on with this, or have we ever thought about this, or if maybe it's 5 different topics, but it all falls on one member of the public. Maybe that's just one, hey, I've heard a lot, Joe, maybe we should put this on a agenda item, because I'm getting tons and tons of questions about it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's one option, or the other option is, I'm getting complaint after complaint after complaint about that junkyard over on Smith Street. And, then you're not going to the code enforcement officer, I don't think necessarily with that information. You're letting the town manager know that this is something that should be discussed with codes. Because this is a priority issue now. People are asking a lot of questions. Can you just figure out what's going on in this place and see if, Alan's been out to take a look at it?
But in that example, that question of, can you go figure that out, that has to come from the whole board to the town manager, or does that have to be one person?
I think if you're the conduit of complaints or concerns that are coming in through you from the public, I think it's fine as an individual to go to the town manager, because at the end of the day, that's an administrative,
And so-
department issue that he manages.
Would that be, rather than saying, me as an individual, hey Jerry, I've gotten a bunch of complaints about loud noises at night on this street. Can you go figure it out, or is it just, hey, I want to alert you that I've gotten 17 complaints this week about this. I don't know what's going on there, but I want you to know. Like, I just don't.
Yeah, see, that would not be the appropriate thing to bring to a select board meeting, because the select board doesn't have jurisdiction over that.
Right.
But it would be a thing that you would bring to Jerry so that he can instruct codes appropriately.
Okay.
Now, take it a little bit bigger picture and say, geez, I've been getting complaints about that junkyard and that junkyard and that junkyard. This seems like it hasn't been a priority in this town to address these things. And we're worried about this from a policy standpoint, that are we putting resources and legal budget to getting these things wrapped up? That now is more of a policy discussion and the type of thing that I think should go to a select board agenda.
That's great clarity on that, thank you.
That's a good example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Or, like the old dangerous building or whatever it is, I feel like this has been in process for a very long time and we're not seeing action. Could we just get an update on what's going on with this thing? That's also totally okay. But again, that would be an issue that you would bring to the chair to put on the agenda, and then you'd have a discussion about it. It would not be for the purposes of directing codes to do something. It's just for getting information, being able to discuss it in public so people can hear what's going on. Okay. So those are the 2 staff things. There's the information into staff and then the information you might get out of staff. So I think we've covered those. Let's talk about interaction with other boards. So generally speaking, again, you don't take your citizen hat off when you become a select board member, but you do have to remember that everybody still sees you as a select board member and may take, the things you say as being the position of the select board, or of you being some position of authority where they've got to do what you say. So let's use a planning board example. Again, you are completely able to have points of view about something that might be in front of the planning board. Whether you're in a butter or whether
I'm
you're
sorry,
just a
is-
concerned.
Is there something we need to?
Oh, it's cold.
Oh, okay.
I know, I put my coat on, I was cold too. Sorry, go.
I think our options are cold and quiet or loud and warm when we turn that thing on, so. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right.
I just wanna make sure it wasn't about this, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, you can definitely go and talk at the planning board. I think you should always give a disclaimer that says, you know, while I am on the select board, I'm here because I'm a neighbor of this subdivision. Assume that if you don't get that disclaimer in there, everybody's going to think you're speaking for the select board. And that would be the case even if it's clear that you're there, you know, if it's extremely clear to you that you're not there representing the select board, everybody still might take it that way. So always give that disclaimer. Let's say you have concerns about how the chair is running a planning board meeting. And, you know, you appointed that chair and you don't like the way these meetings are going. And you want to discuss it. What's the right thing to do there? Couple ways to handle it, I think. I think my preferred way would be to find a conduit to speak with the board chair directly. You're not speaking to them necessarily as their boss or the person who appointed them or a member of the board that appointed them, but just, again, as a concerned citizen, this is what I'm seeing. You could raise
Wait,
that
pause,
issue.
Sorry.
Yep.
So if it, as an individual, not as a board,
As
we
an
have
individual.
an issue with a board chair, the way that they're handling, as an individual, and then you're saying as an individual, have that conversation.
As an
Make sure that you
individual-
Caveat,
Yeah.
it's an, okay.
But
sorry.
I wouldn't necessarily have the conversation directly with the board chair.
Okay,
Because again, I think the perception might be that you're speaking on behalf of the board or that you're telling the person what to do. I think it's best to bring that concern to the town manager's attention and see if the town manager has the interest or the appetite to speak to the board chair and say, just like he might if any other member of the public raised the issue. You know, somebody raised a concern to me that at last week's meeting, there were 15 people left to speak and you didn't let them speak. And, you know, tell me what was going on, what's the rationale, do we need to go to the town attorney and talk about how we manage public comment better? That could be an option. If it's really to the point where somebody on a board needs to be talked to because they're your appointee and their conduct has risen to the level where you feel like there should be some consideration about whether they should still be on the board, that's a totally different story to me. You know, usually there would be some informal conversation first, whether it's the board chair to that board member, whether it's the town manager to that board member. There's no real legal protocol about how to do this stuff, but it's always good to raise the issue to somebody first so they're not blindsided. If it really is to the point where you're considering removing somebody from a board, they have a due process right to a hearing, and the way that gets dealt with can be extremely complicated. Again, if it's like a charge or an accusation against somebody, let's say a board member has been accused of routinely having ex parte communications about an application, and they're undermining the process in doing so. Or let's say they've been, you know, they didn't disclose that they had all these conflict of interests, and that's undermined the decisions. The right thing to do would be to let that person know what the issue is, let them know when there's going to be a hearing of the board, and the board would actually conduct a hearing, usually an executive session, but in that case, because it's sort of a charge or an allegation against the person, they have the right to make that meeting public, which is the worst case scenario in a lot of ways, because now we're airing out dirty laundry in public and making it this adversarial process, but it is their right to do.
And do you have a third-party facilitator for that?
Yes, sometimes.
Because the way I see it is like, in that case, the people casting judgment might also be the people filing the complaint. So I know if I were to be in a public hearing where Josh is complaining about me and then Josh is also the jury and the executioner, I'd be like, well, I want another voice in the room here. So is that where it gets like we call you.
Yeah, I mean, and I've seen these things, was recently involved in a situation where a permit
I don't think you would do that.
applicant made a complaint against a planning board member, 2 planning board members, and each of them wanted public hearings. And then we had each of those members have their own attorney, the complainant had their own attorney, and the select board was left to decide all of this in this, you
So
know,
like
kind
a
of
mini
ridiculous
court of law?
mock court type proceeding,
Oh.
and determine whether there was some discipline warranted
Sounds
at
like
the
a
end of
mess.
all of that. It's the worst. But it is what's called for under the law in that situation, if that's what people choose to do, to make it a meeting in public. And what I would always prefer is that I stay above the fray, because I'm not representing the complainant or the individual board member who's, under investigation or challenge. I can assist the board with how to deal with all of that. I can help you figure out who might be conflicted, because you might be the complainant, or you might have been somehow involved in the issue, and sort of advise the board about what it's able to do. The fact is, when it comes to behavior of your own board members, the only thing you really can do is censure. So a censure would be a public shaming, essentially. We don't like what you did, and we strongly advise you against doing that in the future. But it doesn't stop the person from continuing to be on the board or from acting a certain way in the future. The only way a select board member is ever punished is by the voters, who then would want to vote them out of office. For somebody like a planning board member, a board of appeals member, a budget committee member, it kind of depends whether it's an appointed official or an elected official. If it's an appointed official that was appointed by the select board, and complaints are made about that person that might rise to the level of censure, discipline, removal from the board, then that's where we go into this sort of hearing process. If it's another elected official, the select board can do absolutely nothing. You wouldn't even entertain the complaint. There's nothing you can do. At least in terms of hearing the complaint, you could certainly, as a select board, say, we think it was reprehensible what so-and-so did, and we're gonna make a public statement about that. You could do that, but you're not the adjudicating body in that case, if it's something that an elected official did.
Question.
Yes.
I have a few questions about what you covered here. So that last point, like behavior of board members, and censure and stuff like that, is that subject only to behavior in meeting settings or as a board member, or is that subject to behavior outside of meetings as well?
Yeah, it's gotta tie back to the role as a board member in some way. So it could be conduct outside of meetings, like you have gone, planning board member, and, poked around 10 different application sites in the last year when you weren't supposed to do so. And you brought that information to the board, and it derailed the process. Yeah, it's conduct they did off-site, but it relates to what they did on the board. I recently, in another town, had somebody who was on a committee that awarded grants go to the press and say, this grant process is a sham. Here's how you get a grant in this town. All you have to do is manufacture this, this, and this, and the town will give you money. He basically just provided a pathway, how people can kind of backdoor their way into a grant. And he sort of undermined the validity of the whole process in doing so. Again, like, it's something he did, exercising his free speech outside of an official board meeting, but it undermined the process. It went to his, duties on the board. Let's say you had somebody, you guys don't have a personnel committee, but let's say you did, and the personnel committee hears issues, related to employee discipline and things like that. And let's say that person were making just crazy racist statements out there in the public. We need our people to be acting impartially and not perpetuating discrimination or not causing discrimination in employment. We can't have you on the board. all of those things, could very much have bearing on their ability to function in their appointed roles. Totally fair game. But if you've got, a planning board member who was convicted of domestic violence, you would not obviously want to do anything about that, because while it might be, hugely problematic, it doesn't directly bear on their role.
What if a scenario, we have two planning board members and they have a disagreement on how an application went, but there's a ruling, and then after the meeting in the parking lot, one of them just cusses the other one out, and they come to us as a board and say, the chair came up to me after, and when I told him I didn't agree with this, that they just let into me, swore and called me names and things like that. Like, is that something that's in the capacity as a board member, or is that saying, no, anyone can call you whatever they want, it's a free country?
Because it arose out of a board meeting, and it was about something that was in front of the board. And it wouldn't have happened but for the fact these two people were both on the planning board. I think it is fair game that the select board could take that up in an executive session.
Okay. My other questions here, so we're talking about like board member behavior, whether it's planning board member, conservation commission, whatever. And you said if we see that we're saying, I've been watching those meetings, and that person is not managing meetings well, or they're not, they're unkind or rude or whatever, you said bring that to Jerry. But I thought the boards were kind of reporting to the select board, not the town manager.
That is true. I think, though, it's always fair to give somebody, before making a big public showcase, because there's no way the board can take up an issue without making a public showcase out of it. In
Because of
some
the nature of our
sense.
meetings,
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's always fair to have somebody, and again, it could be you as the designated person to have that conversation. It could be Jerry, to just kind of give the person a heads up. People are complaining about this. Is there anything that can be done? Then you kind of let the person sit on that and see if they can fix it in the next meeting or two. And if they don't, then it's now worthy of making a bigger spectacle about it.
So it is appropriate, though, if somebody, one of the board members comes up and says, hey, Jerry, this board member, this chair, or this whomever has just been really doing X, Y, and Z, and Jerry goes, well, maybe the chair of the select board should talk to them. And they can, outside of a meeting, above all legal bar, just say, hey, we've noticed there's been some concern about how you've been running the meetings and lack of public input.
Yes.
And if that person says, I've done nothing wrong, I don't want to hear from you, that's one thing. If they go, oh, yeah, sorry, worked a 12-hour shift and I totally just flubbed that meeting. That's where there's some discretion there.
Yes.
Now, what about when it comes to issues of the planning board operating in their quasi-judicial capacity of like, I, as a board member, am saying, I think that this planning board is giving away permits that they shouldn't because they're not meeting criteria, or I think that they are not exercising the full suite of requirements, and they should be, because there's some discretion there. How does that work? Because they're quasi-judicial, and we're supposed to kind of let them do that without our influence. And I'm not suggesting we want to do this. I just want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, I think that if it's you as one member of the board who thinks that, you, again, are a member of the public, you could choose to write a letter to speak to the chair directly. You could do those things. But my preference would be to take it to a discussion of the select board. If it's really to the level where you're worried that a board is shirking its duties, then this is the kind of thing where I now would say, talk to Joe, and Joe might be able to say, actually, you know what? 2 or 3 people have mentioned that sort of thing to me from the board over the last couple of months. I guess now it's to the point where maybe we should have a conversation about
Is
it.
that an executive session discussion?
I would see that, if
'Cause-
it's not a discussion about a single person on the board, so if it's not, the chair is being rude and demeaning or cutting people off, if it's more, we're worried that more systematically the board is shirking its responsibilities, you are free as a board to make a statement on certain things. And so I would see that as being like a public discussion about concerns about the planning board's roles and responsibilities. You'd have a conversation out in the public, and this is sort of a nuclear option, like, you're not gonna do this all the time, right?
Yeah, it's not
But-
everything that happens, you say, we need to discuss this
Yeah,
in a
no.
whatever, but,
I mean, this is to the level now where you're really worried about illegalities, you're worried about exposure, legal risk of appeal, that kind
yeah,
of
that's what
things.
I'm getting at, is scenarios where, and I'm not saying this is happening, but I just
No.
wanna make sure we understand, scenarios where it's like, X criteria wasn't met, and they said, we don't really care, we'll let them go through.
Exactly.
And that, to me, that's where it's like, they're quasi judicial and we need to stay out of it, but then if all of a sudden we see, someone saying, you can't award a permit if your driveway's 50 feet wide, and when they said, that's close enough, we'll let them have it, and that's where I'm like, do we have a responsibility?
I've seen this come up specifically with waivers. So a planning board just got in the habit of just giving waivers. If somebody ever asked for them, give them. Developers loved this town because all they had to do was ask, and the planning board would let them do whatever. And, the select board started getting very concerned about that. And we did a couple of things. We did a training, kind of like this, but with the planning board involved, so we understood really what the parameters were. And there was just some sort of discussion and guidance from everybody to the board about, like, this is a problem for these reasons. But yeah, you could, in the scenario of there's just like an operations breakdown at a board, you could discuss it in public, you could ask for recommendations, or you could maybe, task one member of the board to write a letter to the chair on behalf of the board to convey some sort of concern, issue, understanding, whatever it is. But again, if it's just, one appointed board member, that's a point of concern. That's a little bit different. Now we're in executive session territory.
But if okay. And so, obviously, in life, you're not gonna agree with everybody, right? And so, I don't think that it's necessarily appropriate to say, well, so-and-so made this decision, or so-and-so's running their meetings this way, and I just don't like the way they're doing that. I wanna bring it up. Where do you draw the line of, like, this person just has a very direct personality that rubs some people the wrong way, to this person is borderline harassing staff and making people feel really stressed out and like they're on thin ice. Like, where do we, like, is that discretion to when you say
board member
a
stressing
board
people
member on any
different
board or
board.
commission? Yeah.
Yeah, I just generally don't think that the select board should have any role in telling somebody they could do their job differently or better, unless it goes to that point of now we're worried about legal ramifications on the town, or things aren't getting done
So
properly.
yeah, so someone runs a meeting and we just think that they're very terse or whatever.
Yeah.
That's not a concern. But that same person or someone else is now, emailing town staff. I need you to do this. I need you to do that. Can you do this? Can you do that? And they're not following. They're kind of now impacting town staff. Is
Correct.
that where it's more appropriate for us to step in and say,
Yeah, and
maybe
you,
just one board member say, hey, you're hitting up town staff a lot. That's not really something you should do. I'm just trying to understand.
yeah, I think in that example specifically, because it's the impact on town staff, that to me is a Jerry question. So-and-so on such and such board is, I understand, bugging the hell out of a certain staff member. Jerry, I just wanted to let you know that, like, this is the perception I'm getting, and can you follow up on that? And I guess maybe we should touch just a little bit on, like, do we need 5 people communicating things to Jerry in that nature? No, preferably, it's not an official role of the chair to do this, but it's always just so much more helpful to have one major point of contact between the board and Jerry. So it would be helpful whenever possible to try to, I hate to put more work on you, but just to keep from trying to herd cats and kind of have more direct communications. And you as a board have total latitude to figure out what works best. There's nothing saying that you can't have 5 points of contact to Jerry. But for the same reason that I don't like to have 6 points of contact to me when asking legal questions, it just sometimes is a lot easier to kind of deal with
I think of it kind
one
of.
person who's checking in with me.
Think of it kind of like your analogy between like a CEO and a board of directors. Like, how often does an 8-person board of director each individually reach out to a company's CEO? Like, I don't know.
But the
I
chair
haven't
might.
been a board director of a big company or a CEO, so I don't know, but I wasn't sure.
Yeah, but by contrast, the board chair is often on the phone with the CEO, communicating things that the other board members may have communicated with her. Yeah, I think that's a totally fair analogy. And again, you know, you're free to figure out what works best for you, what works best for Jerry. I know I have some town managers where they have like office hours on Tuesday morning. And whether it's by phone or people stop in, that's their time to kind of check in with the board members for the week and kind of field whatever issues or complaints or concerns. Or you just, you know, you schedule your 15 minutes with Jerry every week. If you need him, great. If you don't, great. You know, just keeping it organized is really the key, so that your town manager, who clearly has enough to do anyway, is not also worried about his 5 bosses at all times too.
All right, those are my questions about what you covered so far, so thank you.
Cool. So I think we've covered all the sort of relationship management
So I don't
stuff.
pass that down.
The next thing I wanted to talk about was meetings. We talked about the agenda setting and how to handle that. Let's talk about regular meetings versus workshops. What's the difference? Regular meeting, votes taken. Workshop, votes not taken. That is the very basic differentiator. So a workshop is, we're here to learn about an issue, to discuss it. There is, by definition, no action going to be taken. Public comment is generally another differentiator, although this isn't a hard and fast rule. A workshop is, again, we're here to get work done. We love you, public, but it might not be the most conducive to our getting work done to hear from you right now. That doesn't mean you couldn't, in a particular meeting, have a free conversation with people in the public, or allow some public comment, but that's up to you and your discretion, up to the chair. Generally, though, the presumption is going to be in a workshop. It's nose to the grindstone. We're going to discuss things and get to work on this document or this concept or this budget, and not a lot of feedback from the public. In a workshop, though, you may, you know, let's say we're talking about some particular budget issue, and we want to know what the school budget impact is, our municipal budget. And we have someone from the school here to report on that. Absolutely, you can take that comment and go back and forth and have a free discussion with anybody you need to sort of inform your workshop work. But that doesn't mean that you have to open it up to public comment. And, you know, let's make it something even more freeform. Just, there are 20 people in the audience, but one really knows what they're talking about in a workshop. Absolutely free to engage with that one person and not give everybody else the opportunity to speak.
Should you ask that person to come up to the table?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Sometimes that helps. Yep.
So, for example, between regular meeting versus workshop, I can't remember if you had stepped in by then or not, but we were talking about our meeting schedule and how in December the 17th, we want to have, we're saying maybe a workshop where Jerry brings it in and asks us questions about the budget process, or a direction to take on X, Y, and Z. If we're going to vote to say, pursue an increase in this, then that needs to be a meeting. But if we're just there to discuss generally what the board thinks about certain things, that can be a workshop.
And you can build consensus, you know, in a workshop. That's
Without
not a
a vote,
problem.
yeah.
Yeah. So something like that. I want your feedback about what priorities are, you know. Do we want to add additional staff in this department? What's our capital budget going to be in Public Works? You know, these are things that department heads are bringing to me, and I just wanted to get your feel before I spend a lot of time working them into the budget. You would talk, you might look around and say, I don't know, I mean, I think we're all in agreement that it makes sense to do X, Y, and Z. That's okay, because you're not voting on a budget. Right? You're not taking any official action there. You're just kind of informing him and giving him consensus. Totally fine.
Okay.
Yep.
I had an interim town manager in another town tell me that anything that's on our agendas is something that should be voted on, even if it was just to take no action, and I just wanted your opinion on that.
No.
Okay.
I'm not concerned about just having a discussion and then moving to the next item.
Okay, thank you.
But that might be where if there's issues coming up in that workshop where there's not a consensus, as the chair, I might say, hey, we're gonna have to move this discussion to a meeting, because we're gonna need to take action here, and there's not a general consensus on which direction to head.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of, it's gonna depend on what the topic is. You know, it might be that there's no consensus, and so Jerry ends up in the crummy position of then feeding you a budget document that half of you might hate and half of you might love. And that's fine. You wouldn't necessarily take that to a regular meeting and vote on what the priority is, because that's just not the type of thing one votes on. But if it's something like, I don't know, a question about whether to use a budget that you already have to buy some sort of software or to enter some sort of contract. And maybe Jerry has the authority to, you know, to enter the contract or to purchase the thing. But he really needs to know whether the board supports him or not. Then I do think that should go to a board agenda to be voted on, up or down.
Okay.
All right, executive sessions. So as part of the agenda setting process, we always want to try to identify when we anticipate there being an executive session, because it would be great if we could always have that on the agenda where it's intended. But it's not necessary. Agendas aren't necessary, for that matter. So freedom of access law does not require there be an agenda. If there is an agenda, nothing requires you to stick to it. That said, we all know it's really bad practice to put an agenda up and have 3 things on it and then end up talking about 5.
You're talking about an in general agenda, not
In-
an
in-
executive session
No,
agenda.
in general,
Okay.
agenda, you know.
So freedom of access does not require.
Does not.
So you can from the floor introduce new business.
You can.
Bad practice, but okay.
Super bad practice, and it's always surprised me that it's not a requirement of the freedom of
Yeah.
access law, because like,
Surprises
what
me
benefit
too.
is it to have the meeting in public if people don't know what you're gonna be talking about generally?
So for example, tonight we voted to move a meeting date, it wasn't on the agenda, that's okay.
It is okay, yeah, it is, and you have to use your sensibilities about, like, this is a topic people care about versus this is a topic that's sort of a pro forma procedural type thing. It's never going to be illegal that you talked about and voted something that wasn't on the agenda, but it erodes public trust if actions flow from it and people thought they, you know, had something they could say that would have changed your mind. It's obviously never a good thing.
Yeah, I'd like to think things like, no one's at home like, if I would have known they were gonna move the meeting date, I would have gone and given public comment tonight, but
Right.
for the
I
big
think that as
things.
a board, we do a really good job about
Yeah.
making sure that we don't vote on anything if people, we actually have said, we need to put this on the next agenda because people deserve the right to make a public comment about this issue if they have one.
Perfect.
I think that we do that really well.
I just am happy to hear that, like, what we did tonight is okay, like, hey, let's discuss a change in meeting or whatever. Some of those minor things can come from the floor.
Yeah, I mean, it would be completely unworkable if you had to stick completely rigidly to an agenda, but we always try. And that goes to executive sessions as well. If we expect that something is going to be a legal discussion or a personnel discussion, ideally we want to let people know that there's going to be an executive session. In part because, if you're going to do it before a meeting, people might not want to show up right at the precise moment you go into the executive session. But more importantly, anytime you're doing something in executive session, there's an air of secrecy. And then when you didn't even advertise that
people
you're
about
going
the
to be
secret,
having
yeah.
the executive session, then it starts to look like you're doing backroom stuff. That said, a lot of times stuff comes up between setting the agenda and having the meeting. And it is completely okay if we have an executive session that gets added to the agenda. It's also completely okay if you're discussing a topic and we all thought it was going to be completely benign, but now we're suddenly talking about somebody's, duties or performance or whatever it is, and now we're in territory where it doesn't feel right to talk about it in public.
My question about that, though, is I was under the impression, like, let's say we're talking about something, and again, just an example, Public Works, and we're talking about something, and then all of a sudden one of us realizes that this conversation is really going into a personnel discussion about someone at Public Works. My impression was always, if you were going to discuss somebody, that they need to know in advance that they were a subject of discussion of an executive session, so they could
Be present.
be present or ask for it to be.
Well, I'll do you one better, and if it's going to anybody who is not Jerry and their performance,
It's
then you're
not
not
us
talking about it,
anyways.
period.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but,
But if it's going to like, hey, I guess if it's going into, because I feel like we've had situations before where I think someone said like, I think this is getting a little bit more towards an executive session type topic. If it's talking about like the functionality of a department or something like that, and it is kind of like about Jerry because he's the one who oversees that department, and a discussion's coming through, and it seems like we're now becoming critical of how that department's functioning. There's got to be some sort of alerting of the entities involved that that's a subject of discussion, right?
yeah, but those discussions, if it's a discussion about a department that the select board can have legally, it's probably a discussion the select board has to have in public.
Okay, yeah, that's,
Right, because you're, I don't know, whatever it is, we're concerned that we must not have enough public works staff because the roads are a mess this year. Or what's going on at Public Works, we're getting complaints all the time. My preference would be that you bring that up in a meeting, kind of on a high level to Jerry. We're getting complaints about this, can you look into this and kind of report back?
I guess a better example, I misspoke when I said the department. If it's a board or commission that reports to us and the
Yeah,
discussion
if they
starts
report to
getting towards, this
Oh.
is leaning a little bit more towards discussing that board's performance. Wouldn't they need to be alerted if you said,
Yeah,
because someone could say, well, I'd rather we just go into executive session so we can continue this. And my initial reaction is, well, they don't know we're going to talk about them in executive session. They would need to know in advance, right?
so, let's put it into a hypothetical, let's take your planning board, granting all the waivers thing. You're getting complaints from the public and from neighbors that they've been watching these meetings and things are way too lax and the board's skipping over its findings of fact and they're not doing its job. And you start talking about this, but then somebody says, well, you know what the problem is? The problem is the chair is a developer. Chair's just helping out his buddies. Okay, that's where now we're gonna break and we're gonna do an executive session. If somebody's making allegations about somebody in particular, about wrongdoing.
But you can do that executive session without reaching out to in this hypothetical situation, reaching out to the chair and saying,
At least to take up the issue and figure out what to do next, yeah. You're not gonna have the full hearing and
Okay.
come up with what the resolution's gonna be right then and there without letting the person know.
yeah,
But
okay, yeah,
let's say, somebody wants to raise that point. I think so-and-so is conflicted because they're a developer and they're just trying to help themselves and their buddies. Then you're gonna go into an executive session and say like, look, this is in the nature of a complaint. Do you really wanna make that complaint? Yes, what's gonna happen next? Okay, we're gonna let the chair know, or whoever it is, that they're now the subject of a complaint that's coming from the select board. We're gonna hold a hearing about it.
Right, so basically that alludes to, here's an individual member that's making that complaint, and we go into an executive session to establish what the consensus of the board is and how to move forward
Yeah,
from
basically,
there.
what do we do next?
Okay.
Are you really saying this? Why are you saying that? We're
Yeah.
gonna take this complaint, then we're gonna figure out what to
Yeah,
do with it.
perfect, totally
At
understand now,
some
thank you.
other meeting, yeah. Okay, so your executive sessions, first off, you need a supermajority vote to go into any executive session. So with you, that's 4 out of 5. I try to strive for consensus about getting into executive session always. So that should be your goal. For the most part, you're going to be discussing one of 3 general topics in executive session. These are the most common. Number 1, consultation with legal counsel. So that can be, I'm in the room, I'm on Zoom, I'm on the phone, or even, let's say I can't be at the meeting, or the board doesn't want to pay for me to be at the meeting, but I did provide a letter to Jerry. Jerry wants to let you know what was in that letter. Or I've given Jerry a report about what's going on in some litigation, and he's gonna let you know what's going on based on my memo. All of that's fine, as long as it's sort of a conduit of information that I've given him. The other thing to know, and this is not necessarily an executive session thing, but just to know generally about legal counsel, emails that you send to me about legal stuff, and emails that I send to you about legal stuff are not necessarily confidential, even though you might think so, because confidentiality is only to the extent there's court confidentiality about our discussions. So that would be if there's contemplated litigation or actual litigation. So if I'm advising about, I don't know, the legality of an ordinance that's being discussed, if I'm advising about the rights and responsibilities of the board versus the town manager, or things like that, that's all gonna be public. Meaning, if you write me because you're upset about something the town manager is doing, for instance, then that is totally public record, if somebody makes the request. Or if you write me about what a fellow board member is doing, and you think, like, I can tell the lawyer because it's all, confidential, it's actually not. So, that said, if it's a complaint about somebody harassing somebody else, if it's a complaint, if it's an issue that goes to liability, things like that, where we reasonably could suspect somebody's gonna sue us, then that's a little bit different story. Now we're in confidential territory, but work under the presumption that anything you share with me is potentially subject to public disclosure. And in executive session, conversations with me are confidential. It's a little bit different when it's a document versus a conversation. But if we have a conversation in executive session and you go out and share that conversation with anyone else, even the smallest part of it, there's the risk that you've broken the confidentiality of that session and could be forced to testify about what we talked about. So especially with legal executive sessions, it's super important that we not share anything that's discussed, unless I tell you you can, basically. We often hand out documents in an executive session that we aren't sure are confidential in themselves, but we want to be able to discuss them. So we may hand out a document so you can see it and collect it after. Or I may just tell you about what's in a document. You might say, why aren't you giving me that document? It's because just the fact that we're discussing it in an executive session doesn't make every document we discuss or we share confidential. We want to be very careful about, creating things that are public record before they're ready. So let's say we're contemplating a lawsuit against somebody, and there's a draft complaint. I'm probably not going to give you all copies of the draft complaint so that you can take them out, potentially lose them or tell people what's in them. So that's legal. Number 2 is personnel. And again, I think we've beaten that one to death, but more or less only about the town manager. But you're also going to have a possibility that it's about appointed board members if it rises to the level of, a real complaint against the person or contemplated action like removing them from the board. And then the third one would be, I'll lump this all together, economic development and real estate, when public disclosure of the board's position on something may put you at a disadvantage. So we're thinking about all the options of what we could do with this piece of town-owned property, and here are the things that we think it would be good for and what we think it's worth and that kind of thing. That can be done in executive session. If you have a piece of property for sale, obviously all the conversations about potential offers and all of that could be done in executive session. You have a big company coming to town and they want to share their development plans with you and they're asking for assistance, and they've given you a big bunch of documents to show what their economic position is, then those documents are all confidential. The conversation you have about them is confidential as well. Okay. So those are the 3 big ones. there are lots of other little small things, union negotiations if we ever get there. Lots of things that fall under separate categories of executive session. As you know, you always have to cite the provision of law under which your executive session is being called. If you have 2 or 3 different executive sessions stacked up, let's say at the beginning or end of a meeting, I would want you to, let's say you enter the legal one, you have your legal discussion, you only talk about the thing that you're there to talk about, more or less. You come out, and then you would go back into a different executive session. Let's say this time it's under section 406A. You're going to cite that, you're going to vote, you're going to go into that executive session. In terms of votes that come out of an executive session, this can be really tricky because you don't want to necessarily disclose everything that you just talked about in the executive session, but sometimes there is an action item that you have to take a vote on. So, we are going to file suit against a contractor who's in breach. And you just had a long executive session with me talking about the pros and cons of doing so and what our position is. You would probably, for the vote, distill that all down to motion to authorize the town attorney to file a lawsuit against ABC Corporation for breach of contract arising from the plowing contract. You wouldn't say anything else. Let's say it's a personnel matter. You would have, let's say we're talking about a raise for Jerry. We're gonna have all the conversation about Jerry's performance, what his ask is, what the market is, what your concerns are in the executive session. And you can come to a consensus in that executive session about what you wanna do, because we don't wanna air out the dirty laundry and say all the pros and the cons in public. But you're not going to take the vote in executive session. You're going to get to the point where you're ready to take a vote, and you're going to come out and you're going to say, a motion to approve a raise of 2% for the town manager for the 25 budget year. And again, you can leave all the nitty gritty in the executive session. Yes.
Like hardship abatements, are you gonna go there?
No, but that's a really good question. So hardship abatements, I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Are you guys the Board of Overseers of the Poor? You are, yeah.
Oh, I
So-
thought that we did that in executive session.
Yeah,
Okay.
you do.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, so the concern is, and this goes to the agenda too, like you can't put, we're considering a poverty abatement for Sue Smith on the agenda, so you're not gonna do that. It's consideration of a poverty abatement. You are going to go immediately into the executive session, you're gonna have the entire discussion. And what you can't do is then come out and say, we're giving a poverty abatement to Sue Smith, because, the poor woman is 3,000 in the hole every month. So, what you would do in that case is say as much as you can without disclosing the confidential information. So, the motion would be to grant the poverty abatement requested and to authorize the assessor to issue the abatement form.
So we would just say, we move to grant a poverty abatement for $4,700.
Yep.
That's the entire motion. We don't say who, we don't say anything else.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Let's say we're talking about litigation, and I've asked for, what do you think about this? Do we want to move for damages? There might be ramifications for doing so. We might look like bad people, when all we're trying to do is to get this dangerous building taken down. And we can have that whole conversation in executive session. Generally speaking, I'm not going to ask for any sort of a public vote in that case. Because I don't really want to disclose what our legal strategy is about something. I'm just looking for consensus. It's going to be the very rare case that on something where it's a legal question, we need to come out of an executive session and take a vote to direct the town attorney to do anything. It's basically like to file suit, to approve a settlement, things like that are really the only things I expect public votes on coming from legal. Yeah, I think that covers executive sessions. Any questions there?
Only question I have is, do we have to submit any notes we take during executive session as part of it?
Just try not to take notes during
So the
executive
question I
session.
have is I scratched some math down, and I was like, literally just calculating percentages. Does that then become?
So one of
But if
the
I type it on a calculator and then
yeah.
it doesn't, I'm just
One of the annoying things about FOA is it does not say that notes taken or documents exchanged during an executive session are confidential.
Mm-hmm.
So we could be talking about a confidential topic, but if you take notes on it, those notes might be subject to. So
Okay.
I don't necessarily want you to turn them in, but do know that at least it's a public record.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we can make a claim that it's confidential for any sort of reason, that doesn't give you the right to
But
destroy them.
so someone can do a FOA request and say, I want all notes taken during last executive session.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I may have some really good arguments why we shouldn't give them, but it's gonna be
Mhm.
a document by document kind of question.
Mm-hmm.
So the easier answer is to try not to take notes.
Okay, good to know.
Use that calculator.
Yeah.
Press clear.
Yeah.
I mentioned not disclosing what we talk about in a legal executive session because the whole breaking the confidentiality thing, but you should not be disclosing anything that's talked about in an executive session. If we're talking about it in an executive session, there's a reason why.
Mhm.
Even if you, let's use my example of XYZ Corporation has come to town with some proposal and they're asking for grants and TIFs and whatever they want from the town, and you're super excited about the prospect of this company coming to town, and you think, oh, well, it's just the TIFs and the grants and the economic situation, how many jobs, and those details that are the problem. I'm not gonna share those things, but I'm gonna be excited and tell everybody, hey, this company is coming to town, and they're inquiring about, this piece of property over there. Because we talked about it in an executive session, and if we only talked about it in executive session, you have to keep every single piece of that information confidential. So while some of that conversation could have been had in public, in theory, we didn't have the conversation in public. So that doesn't give you the right to disclose what we talked about. So just generally, like the easy rule of thumb is if it's talked about in an executive session, if it hasn't been talked about in public, don't talk about it. Because there are sometimes very important strategic reasons why we talk about things in executive session, and the board really needs to, as a consensus, determine when the right time is to bring things public. Okay, so that's that. Going into the budget process, I just wanted to touch in terms of the relationships between boards. The budget committee, select board relationship can be a bit fraught in budget time. I know you have, I believe, a 9-member elected budget committee. One complicating factor here is we don't have any sort of ordinance or charter that details what the budget committee does, when and how. So I think that leaves it up to the board and budget committee to figure out a workable process. And what we want to try to avoid is giving the budget to the budget committee so late in the process that the only thing they can really do is say we hate it, that's not really constructive or helpful for anybody. So Jerry and Joey and I talked about maybe some practical ways to address this in the future. And my only suggestion was involve them earlier, bring them in so they're seeing the initial budget presentation. Find a way to give them some feedback earlier in the process. They have a role, it might not be a clearly defined role, but they have a role under statute to make a recommendation up or down on each budget line item. And because they have that obligation, we want to make sure that they're, operating on all the same information that you guys are, and brought in early so that you don't get your budget recommended no. Other than that, the only way to really clarify that role and to change, if there was something structural with the budget committee that can be improved, all of that. Now we really are. I remember you asked me in my interview what I thought about charters, and I said, well, sometimes I hate them, but this is a situation where, it's really only a charter that could address this budget committee thing, or potentially an ordinance that changes the way they're, are they elected, are they appointed, are they 9 members, are they 5 or 7? We could talk about all of that. For now, you've got what you got.
When you say that the budget committee has doesn't really have a charter or any function laid out. Are you saying in general, or the one in Durham based off of our,
Yeah, in Durham, because you have no charter, because you have no administrative ordinance that sort of sets out what the role is and when, it just complicates things a little bit, leaves it a little up in the air. But the beauty of it is too, that gives you a lot of latitude to work with to figure out something that works for everybody.
There multiple, I used to be on the budget committee before I was a select board member, and multiple times, you know, like, I was like, why don't we as a committee talk about ways to generate revenue? And some of the other budget committee members who are like super by the book, and they're looking at what the bylaws are, and what is written in the budget committee bylaws as responsibility is to only make recommendations on the select board budget. And so I'm just wondering if, since we don't have a charter and it's not an ordinance, is there a latitude with that where we could like potentially have a conversation about assigning them tasks that are in addition to this type of thing?
Yeah, the board bylaws are written by the own board and managed by the own board, and that board can vary from their own bylaws at any point. But in the budget committee's case, that doesn't mean the select board has to, you know, listen to your recommendation or have whatever conversation the budget committee wants to have. So it's just a bit tricky to figure out where everybody's lanes are and how you can be effective and helpful, and where now you're just gonna be seen as interfering. Or in general, though, the budget committee is an advisory board, so advice that's given in the nature of advice, I think, can be, you know, taken or left as the select board wants.
Yeah.
And if you guys wanna, you know, recommend a 25-year capital projects plan on the budget committee, you can do so. The select board doesn't have to talk about it for a minute if you don't want to. It's all at your political discretion and potential peril.
And if we ask them to do something like that, do they have the, like, can they say no?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, because their bylaws are written by themselves, and there's nothing established in the town ordinances to have it exist, let alone do certain tasks. So it's just that we elect.
Right, I think when we did our workshop thing where we had all the other boards and committees come and have the conversation with us about what their goals were, we've always viewed the budget committee in a very different way than all the other boards and committees, and I'm trying to get a sense of whether or not we could utilize them in that way, the way that we do the other boards and committees, and if we should be having those types of conversations with them too or not. That,
Totally up to the board, the
Okay.
select board.
okay, thank you, that's helpful too.
Yeah, I mean, I think short of a charter, you know, the reason I expressed some concern about charters is just because you have no control over what a charter commission does once they're formed, and they might go in a crazy direction, for the better or the worse of the town. But one thing you could think about is an administrative ordinance. If you've ever looked at any other town's administrative ordinances, you could go do some Googling. But that might cover the budget process and give a little bit more of a parameter about what the budget committee's role in it is, what the select board's role in it is. You know, you could also, some towns address things like bonding and what that all looks like in an administrative ordinance. And, you know, any bond question has to be submitted to a referendum, for instance, as opposed to a town meeting vote. So that's an idea of some sort of a middle ground if we have some of these organizational structural things that we need to kind of put more guardrails on.
Excuse me.
Thank you. And then the other thing is, again, this is sort of your relationship with the town manager and how to make life a little bit less burdensome for the town manager. The budget process is, you know, can be so fraught, and your town manager is putting a lot of time and effort into that process, and so the way you make all of that go a lot smoother is doing exactly what you're doing, I think, which is to have sort of priority setting meetings and big picture discussions before he starts putting numbers to paper, so that you're not in a position of, you know, he provides you a budget and then now you have a whole bunch of policy discussions about making value judgments on this, that, and the other within the budget, that your town manager is just like administering the government that he already has, right? It's not his job to come up with new ways to do things. He's just telling you what he's got, what he needs, what the department heads have given him for budgets. And if you are wanting to change certain things in a bigger picture, he's got to know early in the process. Because I have seen it happen where, manager enters the budget process thinking everything looks peachy, and then everything gets blown up and there's not enough time to put it all back together.
But essentially what you're saying from a legal standpoint, where we're at with our budget committee and the lack of a charter, and it's just use them however we want to. We could say, we want you to come to this workshop meeting and we want you to hear everything that we're talking about. We could say, we want you to go interview each department head to get a idea of what their budget is, or we could say, we want you to just comment on the fiscal note,
Yeah, you could. You could say, hey, budget committee, if you're interested in investigating whatever this segment of the budget discussion is and providing some specific recommendations, if you're willing to take that on, would you do that and bring it back to the next meeting? They don't have to listen to you, you don't have to listen to them, but it's a way you could work together and divide labor a little bit.
Okay.
And you might, probably the ship has sailed this year, but, you might consider in the early fall having a budget committee, select board joint meeting and just kind of talk about the budget forecast for the coming year and priorities and things like that. So you are free to involve them more, involve them less. They're free to make requests and provide guidance that you don't take or that you do. Anything on budget?
It's just an
Budget committee?
interesting process. They can do as much or as little as we ask, and they can reject or accept as much or little as we ask,
Yeah.
because there's no defined role.
Well, I think if you look at it backwards, you're trying to get to an endpoint where you have a town meeting warrant that says budget committee recommends, select board recommends on every single budget item. And how do you work backwards to get to that goal? And, involvement seems to me to be the answer, earlier rather than later. Giving people that investment in the process a little bit more and understanding the real reasons behind the numbers rather than just hating the end result.
I think that even goes to what we talked about earlier. It's like, we didn't talk about whether we were gonna communicate that strategy plan ahead with the budget committee. Should we be?
Yeah,
Should we be
well, that's
inviting
what I
them
got.
and-
I think we can just talk
Yeah.
about that in the upcoming meeting
Yeah.
stuff, because I had wanted to hear first from legal counsel and then talk about that for that, so we all understand the scope, but I think it's a good point.
I have a question about something we already talked about that I didn't ask. Can I ask it?
Go for it.
It's really quick. So we have had feedback regarding workshop meeting and the fact that we have public comment, but there's no back and forth. And there are residents that want to ask us questions and would like an answer. And I'm just wondering what your position is, or how you would recommend best facilitating that. It doesn't happen all the time, but there are definitely times where, there are residents that do want to be able to, or boards or committees that want to be able to talk to us and ask us questions, and our meetings are just not set up for that at all. And so I don't know how to facilitate that type of discussion with residents or boards and committees.
Yeah, just because somebody asks a question doesn't mean they're entitled to an answer. You have to get through your meeting, and if you spent all the time answering people's questions and letting them kind of set the discussion, that's not necessarily productive all the time. So, you try to do what you can, but at some point you have to move on. Or maybe we're here, yes, we appreciate your question, but this is a workshop to discuss this, and we really need to get our work done, so we're not gonna derail it with this question. We'll bring it up at a different meeting, or, whatever we're gonna do. How do you manage public comment now? You have a period at the beginning of the meeting?
Right, and people can come and make their public comment, but we don't back and forth. We thank them for coming, and then that's that.
Yep.
And there's no like procedure or protocol for any type of follow-up after the fact. And those are some things that personally, as a board member, I'm taking issue with, and I just don't know what the right way to go about facilitating that is.
Yeah, okay. I've seen it handled a couple different ways. Again, you are free to just let questions hang in the air and not address them. Some boards will do public comment, select board comment, and within that select board block, before you get into the regular meeting, anybody on the select board could say, I just want to address the comment that was raised about this and this, and, you know, here's my answer, or here's my concern, or, you know, the chair, I would like to discuss this at a future meeting, or whatever it is. Short, to the point, not creating a whole separate agenda item within the comment, but, yeah, I think that's fine. What if somebody comments in public comment, but it's on an agenda item? Are they encouraged to speak on the agenda item, or do you keep people in their lane of public comment only at the beginning of the meeting?
Public comment only at the beginning of the meeting, and we do have it in our bylaws that the board member can ask to reopen a public comment session, and the board all has to vote to agree to do that.
Good to have the chair here for this. We're talking about public comment and how you structure things, like if people have questions, when the best time is to address them, if you need to address them. I suggested maybe having public comment, then select board comment, so that would be a block of time that if somebody wanted to address a public comment item, they could briefly do so. I tend to prefer, I mean, I've been to, you know, a lot of meetings. I tend to prefer a rule that says if somebody's here to speak on an agenda item, that they speak during that agenda item, as opposed to in a public comment at the beginning. So public comment then gets reserved only for stuff that is not on the agenda. And then you keep things in a more organized fashion with your agenda items. We're gonna have an introduction of this item, select board discussion, then we're gonna open it up to the public, then we're gonna go back into discussion and take any action that needs to be taken. Just feels a little bit more organized, prevents you from being bombed with 40 different comments that you then, in the beginning of the meeting, have to synthesize and figure out, does it, you know, relate to this, that, or nothing on the agenda at all?
You're saying public comment on the agenda item before select board discussion?
Select board, it's gonna get, like, introduced. There's gonna be
Yeah.
some preliminary discussion
Yeah, we
about
might
the
be
item.
saying we're talking about the
Generator.
doors at the Eureka Center. Yeah.
Yep.
And so and then say, is there any public comment before we begin our discussion on that?
Yeah, I mean, normally you'd have, let's say it's the manager, you know, I've gotten 3 different quotes on this, you know, this company A is this, company B is that, company C is this. The select board might ask some questions about those. Okay, now we've gotten enough information on the table that people in the public can speak in an educated fashion about it. So now we're gonna open it up to public comment. And it doesn't have to be a super rigid process, but whatever works best on that agenda
Yeah.
item.
So the problem that when we went to GPCOG, the lawyers there said that once we open it up for public comment on one of the items, it has to be across the board for all of the items. We couldn't just pick and choose what got opened and how we set that. So, I mean, you set yourself up for a meeting that's gonna go for 3 hours instead of 1.5 hours at that point, with public comment on something that you really weren't looking for public comment on. So it's like an all or nothing deal is the way that the GPCOG lawyers explained to us last year. Is that still true, or is that something we can adjust?
Yeah,
per
so
item?
I think the process that I'm advocating for doesn't really, it's not gonna change the amount of public comment that you get, it just organizes it better. If people are jazzed up about something you guys are talking about, they're either gonna come and talk about it in public comment in the beginning, or they're gonna wait it out and talk about it at the agenda item. But within that, you can still have controls. So let's start from the very basic premise. Unless it's a public hearing advertised as such, people do not have the right to be heard at any select board meeting, period. So anything outside of a public hearing that you're allowing the public to speak is at your discretion and subject to whatever you feel is helpful or not helpful to get your business done. And there may be some things where you just don't, frankly, it's just not up for discussion. It's not something that the public really is going to have an interest in. You are free to not take public comment on that agenda item. So you could have 3 issues on the agenda you are going to take public comment on, and 4 issues that, you know what, we've already discussed this at 3 meetings. Now it's time to take action. We're not going to take any public comment.
But, so we are allowed, so like what you're saying here is, you know, we could said today, we're gonna take public comment on the discussion of the straw poll and, the, you know, discussion of budget schedule, but not our discussion and training with attorney, and that's okay to say
Yep.
that?
Absolutely.
And then we are allowed to build in constraints, because like right now, we say public comments limited to 3 minutes per person. And I think in our policy, we said, and not to exceed 30 minutes cumulatively, so we
Yep.
don't get into, you know, everyone reading Green Eggs and Ham over and over again at the public comment, just to slow things down. So that, I just wanna make sure that those constraints aren't an infringement of like First Amendment rights, and it sounds like you're saying there's not a right to be heard at a select
There's
board
not a
meeting.
right to be heard. You do have equal protection concerns though, and that's where they're getting at a little bit.
Mhm.
So that means if you're opening it up for public comment on a topic, we're not gonna say, no, we're not gonna hear from you, you, and you, because we don't like your point of view. Or we've heard from you enough. You know, we are gonna try to give everybody equal opportunity to
Mhm.
speak. But again, you are allowed to control for repetition.
Mhm.
Yep, we've already heard that point, thank you. You can control for relevance.
Okay, that's what I was gonna ask.
Yep. You can control for just time.
Mhm.
And so, you know, what a good chair will do is keep scanning the room, make sure that before person A gets up and tries to speak again, that person B has had full opportunity to be heard. Setting the ground rules at the beginning is super helpful. So if you have some exciting issue that you know people are, the room's packed, just be very clear at the very beginning. We're gonna take 30 minutes of public comment. We've got a lot of business to get through tonight. And you are free to make the 3 minutes, 2 minutes, or 1 minute if it's the best way to fairly give everybody a chance
We
to
could
say
say you
something.
can't yield your 3 minutes to somebody else, so we have one person talk for 30 minutes. So,
I pull that trick all the time. I'm a lawyer and I represent 5 people and I would like, 15 minutes instead of 3. And, your chair has the discretion to say, yeah, that's fine. But we're gonna hold you to it.
yeah.
So, yeah, I wouldn't tie yourself up in knots about making sure everybody has the right to be heard and it's all
But that
completely
is something
egalitarian.
we hear a lot is, I'm gonna comment on something you're not gonna talk about for an hour and a half, and I don't even know what you're gonna say about it,
Yeah, see, that's
And I might like
that's
what you're
I don't
doing
love.
instead,
Exactly. Exactly,
Or-
or
and
they're
it-
commenting based on the fear of something.
Exactly,
that is
and
not
then
even
maybe
part of
if
the
they get
discussion.
introduced to it, they hear information about it, some of their questions get answered, or some of their comment might become void to them,
Yeah,
right? Because the question has been answered in the presentation. But if we do it at the beginning, they haven't even heard the information to be able to speak on the topic yet. Anyways.
yeah, I don't know if
I'm
you
not
have-
trying to
yeah.
go down a rabbit hole,
I don't know if you have some of these people, but I feel like every town has some of these people where they're gonna be at every meeting. They're gonna know what's on the agenda in advance and they're gonna have a pre-programmed 10-minute thing that they wanna say about the whole agenda. And, there's another town that I don't even represent, but when I go to their meetings, I love it. There's this guy and the guy always has a monologue he wants to give about what they're talking about that night.
I have one
But it's not
follow-up
usually that
question.
informed, at that point. You can be more informed later in the discussion when you've heard a little bit more about the item.
If we move to this format that you're talking about, like our planning board, on their agenda, it will say public comment not taken or public comment taken on whatever the item is.
Oh.
Are you suggesting spelling it out that way, or are we going on the fly?
No, you're gonna go on the fly.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
And you might enter a discussion where, I don't know, maybe a new idea is raised. And you see people in the audience wanting to comment on it. It's fair, you can, if you wanna hear from the person, you can break and let somebody talk even if you weren't planning to. But you do need to be cognizant of like, that's just one person and now it might open it up to the full group wanting to talk, and we don't wanna say, okay, you, but not you. And I gave the example of the workshop. Totally fine if there's one person or two people who have particular relevance to the subject matter and can actually contribute to the conversation.
Okay, food for thought, guys.
Cool.
Yeah. So my last item to talk about was FOA, but I swear I think I've covered every single thing FOA related, but within another topic. The only thing that I think I haven't talked about is retention of documents, which is not necessarily FOA, but the sister of FOA, and a really easy way to get tripped up. Just imagine you have to keep your documents forever, because the retention rules are pretty crazy, actually. Even transitory correspondence can be 6 years that you have to retain this stuff.
Yeah.
So, lesson.
Deal with it all the time.
Lesson number 1 is, I know you have town email accounts. Definitely just use your town email accounts for all town business. And if it is a text message that could be an email, make it an email. If it's a social media message that could be an email, make it an email. The reason being, now the town has it. I don't know about our IT. It's maybe not ideal, but at least there is a server somewhere that has all of that traffic back and forth. And it's a little less your concern to make sure you've properly stored and managed everything.
So FOA, if someone submits a FOA request and they want to know everything every select board member has said, I know like at my agency when we get them, we want to know everything that this person or this group of people has said about this topic. And so if it's a simple request, our coordinator handles it. If it's a big request, there's a fee associated. But they have to track everything down. Here, with us having our personal cell phones being our primary phones, any conversation between individual board members can be forwarded.
Yep, any text message, any social media message.
And so then, like social media posts and comments, someone would have to go through and find all the social media content and say,
Potentially.
even if they were saying this as an individual, not as a board member.
If it relates to board business, it would be fair game for a FOA request.
Okay.
So, yep, I absolutely, if I were contemplating a lawsuit for somebody, could make a FOA request for every text message, email message, social media message, or post.
Or even communication between them and other boards and whatnot
Absolutely.
on their messengers or whatever.
Yep, and that's usually the kind of stuff that at least I, as a lawyer trying to challenge something a town has done, I want to see. Like, I want to see what planning board members were saying to each other, because I'm trying to disqualify a planning board member, or trying to show that there was bias, or I'm trying to show that the select board is colluding to do something. So it is important, that because people do make these requests, and it's that kind of stuff that you can easily lose track of. Like, oh, I'm done with social media, I'm gonna kill my Facebook. But you're not thinking about the fact that your messenger was used for 3 years for you to talk to other select board members or the public about stuff that was going on. If you have a social media page, like, maybe you guys don't do this here, but in my council towns, people run full candidacies and they have web pages and they have social media pages. All of their posts and feedback very well may end up being public record, especially if they're an incumbent. And now we have to worry about, what happens to that Facebook page or that YouTube page or whatever it is. So just be mindful of all of that.
And getting rid of that. Yeah, getting rid of that without archiving it could be
Could be a
destruction.
problem.
So
Right.
like if I post something on social media where I have this long spiel about something, and then I say I'm done with Facebook, I'm off it, I just destroyed public record.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Well,
Same,
if we
same for you,
save it-
you kill a phone where you had dozens and dozens of text messages on.
We do need to have a motion to extend our meeting. So I move that we extend our meeting 15 minutes Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposition? Seeing none? Okay. Sorry.
Okay, so record retention, often a problem. When you get down on the board, if you have your, binders and binders of documents, my preference would be that you just hand that over to the town to be archived or stored, so that you don't have to worry about, someone 5 years down the road having to try to find stuff. The other reason to just try to use email, like I said, was at least that way it's word searchable and there's a central point. So we don't have to ask you each to do a word search across 5 different platforms to figure out what you talked about with whom. And then we have
And how does
all of
that-
that collective time.
How does that work if someone's saying, well, we want a FOA, and I come back and say, well, here's all my emails, and they go, well, we want to see what your text messages and your social media and everything is, and I say, oh, I didn't do anything there. They'd say, prove it.
Yeah, if you know that you don't have a record, usually we can just say, I know I don't have the record. The other alternative
'Cause-
is you tell the person, like, I can search for 8 hours. I know I'm not gonna find
Yeah.
anything, but I'm gonna charge, we're gonna charge the staff time to go through 8 hours of searching different word combinations to see that we
Yeah.
don't have this.
Yeah.
I've got one fun lawyer right now who keeps, trying to just make a point by doing FOA searches just to show there wasn't a thing. And so my response to that is always, okay, we'll look to make sure there wasn't the thing, but it's, 10 hours and you have to pay us for 8 of those hours at $25 an hour before we start.
And is there a set document about retention requirements? Because I know, like,
Yeah.
I have one for work, but I don't know if that's my agency specific or if that's from, like, the
The state
AG's
archives,
office,
yeah, the
archive
state,
office.
state archives has schedules for different branches
Okay.
of government. They have a local government, schedule. But I will just say that sometimes things that you would think would have been addressed aren't on there, or they are addressed and they're addressed in a crazy way, like you've gotta retain the stuff for 6 years.
we have, like, paper retention
Yeah.
versus electronic versus.
And the rules about electronic retention are onerous about what media you can store it on and what counts as okay and what's not. We don't have a PD, but a recent example was, there's no schedule that talks about how long you have to retain that video footage on body cams for police and dash cams. And that storage is crazy expensive. And in theory, the towns are supposed to be retaining those things for 6 years. So they don't always keep up with the times is the point. So just when in doubt, don't create the record if possible, because that's just putting a burden on yourself to.
But I think the big thing you
maintain
shared
it.
with us here is that discussing any business on personal devices or personal things is subject to FOA, because that's what I've always learned at work. It's like, if I text a coworker on my personal device and talk about work, my personal device is
Yeah.
now FOAable.
Now, let's say the person who's making the request is quite sure that you engaged in those communications and you're lying, to your point. In theory, there could be a freedom of access lawsuit. There could be an AG investigation. At that point, it's not just them asking you to give them what you have that's a public document. They may be looking for the absence of. So that means they may be looking through all your personal communications on that given day to see if you're lying. So it's just easier to keep things sequestered whenever possible.
Is it a better legal option for municipalities to, I'm not saying necessarily do this now, but consider issuing devices to board members and having that be their, because like we have to communicate to each other through our personal phones. We don't have a town device. Our emails are on our personal computers. We don't have a town device. From your legal perspective, does it expose us to less risk if we have town devices and then just stick to that being the device that we do all town business on, or is it not worth it?
I don't mind the device piece of things so much. It's the server piece of things.
Okay.
So if there were, like Google Docs is a great thing to use, for instance, because now it's in one central place on the cloud. We don't have to worry about versions of things being on people's computers. And again, email with proper backup and proper server management is great, because it doesn't matter what device you're working on, you can still all get to the same place. So I'm not so concerned about the only thing that's good about town issued devices is when you are off the board and you turn in that device, it's got all your stuff, and you don't have to worry about going through that process of like finding all the folders where he stored the stuff and putting it on storage media and giving it to the town. So that stuff can be fraught. Just real quick, just a 2-minute warning about engaging in back and forth between the board. So part of FOA is public meetings, and any board business needs to be conducted in a public meeting, which means that any back and forth that is shared among a quorum of the board is certainly subject to being, alleged as a violation of FOA. We always say that procedural stuff is fine, we're talking about who can meet when. Do we want to talk about this agenda item at this meeting? No, I think we're not going to have enough time. Let's push it off to the next one. That stuff is fine, but what I don't want to get into is substantive communication about anything. The other thing we want to try to avoid doing is a game of telephone where Joe's trying to avoid a meeting by polling each of you about something to get a consensus and then kind of shortchanging the whole public discussion piece of things. I don't mind if, you're trying to determine whether there's interest in pursuing a particular angle. That's fine. What do you think of this, that, or the other? But not to the exclusion of talking about it in public.
I think this is also one of the things that our board's very good at. We're all very conscious and aware, and if one of us needs to send out a thing that has to do with administrative whatever, we say don't reply all, reply to Joe, so he knows if it's gonna go on the agenda or whatever.
Yeah.
I think we are as a board doing a good job with this.
Good. And, there's nothing saying that one board member can't do an opinion piece about something and say, I just want to get my thoughts on this issue out on paper and send it to everybody. That's okay, but if it's the kind of thing you would have normally talked about in a meeting, I'd rather you talk about it in a meeting.
Cool.
All right, that's about what I got.
Everything
You're
is
good, thank
followable.
you.
Everything's fine.
Thank you very much.
So your training obligation, I would consider to be met based on all the stuff we've talked about. Didn't get you that form, but it's like a self-certification form.
Yeah.
All you need to do is say, I certify that I reviewed the FOA materials and on this date.
The one other question I had for you is, we signed the warrant for the special town meeting, and we have 4 articles in here. Jerry, you said you sent this for review. And the first article is, to choose who presides. Second is to agree by the main moderator's manual. And then Articles 3 is to elect a moratorium, and then Article 4 is shall an ordinance entitled Moratorium Battery Energy Storage System be enacted. What's Article 3 just to elect a moratorium?
Wait, what was 3? I thought 3 was shall an ordinance entitled moratorium be enacted. And there wasn't a 4. This is different than the version I looked at.
Do you know anything about that?
Okay. Get rid of Article 3.
So
So it's,
the problem is we just went with that at 6 o'clock today, 6:30 today. So that's what's posted.
Just reconsider. Oh, it's already been posted?
I think Jessica
It's
was.
posted
As
because
of tonight.
it's 7
Yeah.
days
Okay.
from today, and so she posted it because it had to be posted. And
It's-
it's posted this way.
Okay. Before we break, why don't you have a motion to reconsider the adoption of the warrant and strike Article 3, make Article 4 Article 3, and to replace the warrant. That's completely fine. It's still
Okay.
enough
I
of this.
motion that we reconsider the article, the warrant to strike Article 3 and replace Article 3 with Article 4.
Second.
Any additional questions on the motion?
did you from here? So,
All in,
Just pull the one, sign the new one.
We'll have to go sign
Yeah.
new ones and then exchange them.
okay,
yeah.
But don't pull them till we get the new ones
Yeah.
up.
Correct.
getting them tomorrow.
I would say that's in the nature of a Scrivener's error because it's not saying like to enact a moratorium
Yeah.
on what.
And
It's
it
not,
says draft on it,
Yeah.
right?
the one that's
Well, not the
posted
one we
should say.
signed.
No,
Oh,
not
okay.
the one
Oh,
we
okay,
signed.
okay,
Anyways,
sorry.
but,
This is
so,
the one
Did we vote on it yet?
I
We
don't
had-
think
no,
so. I
we-
think mine
we-
only had 3.
we have to,
So I don't know what
do we have any
happened
other
between-
questions on the motion?
Right.
All right, all in favor? Any opposition? Okay, seeing none. yeah, we just went with it because of time constraint, and we thought that it looked weird, but whatever.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
different than the one I saw earlier today, but
Looks like a partial sentence on number 3, yeah.
Scrivener's error, I think it's fine to
Mhm.
fix like that.
Perfect.
All right, thank you, folks.
We have 5
Thank
minutes.
you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. So informative. We appreciate you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
I want to stick to our 6 minutes here. So real quick, I just have a draft right here of what our next couple meetings look like. Today's obviously the 12th. We discussed all these things. The 26th, we were talking about DOT. Jerry, what's this audit line?
That's the audit, 23 audit, where she comes in and kind of goes over the audit.
Yep, okay, so we'll keep that in there. I think we need to punt the junkyard hearing.
Okay,
The doors are fine. Paid medical leave, I think we can keep. Well, when does that get enacted?
January 1st, and I haven't,
Let's punt that to December 10th as well then.
okay,
The doors, do you need something from us on that date
I
or?
gotta get some information, I gotta see if one of you have the envelope,
Yeah,
the thing, because
it seems like
it's
it was
among the
grabbed.
missing.
What,
The manila envelope from last meeting.
oh,
The only thing on here that I wanted input on that I didn't feel comfortable moving without input from the rest of you was the Durham Historic District Commission's, was it a manila envelope, Jerry, or was it a blue envelope? The Durham Historic District Commission's desire to do get a quote for an architectural survey. They sent in a request for us to fill out a bunch of paperwork, and we would need to sit down and talk about that because there's a lot of questions there, and they are not in a position to fill that out. So what we thought was something that they were going to be able to do is turning into something that requires a lot more effort on us. And do we want to take that up at our next meeting or the December 10th meeting? Our next meeting is already looking pretty busy, but I want to know your
didn't we
all's thought.
move the December 10th meeting to,
No, it's the December 10th is still December 10th.
Okay.
December 17th is the
This is-
budget, yeah,
okay.
instead of the 24th. So did folks have thoughts on that? Because I know that was one of the priorities we issued to them. To me, with all the other things that have popped up in town, that's becoming less of a priority for this year, to me. But I didn't know what your all's thoughts were.
What is it about the form that they can't fill out?
They said that they can't fill out any of it. It has to do with, do you want it to be a large survey or a small survey? Do you want it to be?
I have,
I mean,
I have a
Which
question
is-
about this.
to,
1 second, continue.
to me, that's what we instructed them to do, and so
Right.
that's, I mean, that's a conversation I think we should be having, so I think it should be a fairly quick conversation. This is something that's in your wheelhouse, we're asking you
At
to set
minimum,
this
come with
up
recommendations.
and do this. I feel like this is exactly what they're supposed to be doing,
Yeah,
and so if they don't want to do it, then it's not a priority, so.
Joe, you had something too?
Yeah, no, I second that you know, that they're our experts. If they're
Mhm.
not gonna be the experts, then we'll get others to be our experts, but we're not the experts either. So, you know, that's why we have that committee, to do that kind of work, so I am a little, big question mark goes up in my mind.
Yeah.
My thought is that this is the kind of thing where the Conservation Commission, I might be speaking wrong, I don't remember, or maybe like the solid waste, there was confusion about what we had tasked them with, and so we had them come back and we clarified their task, right? I feel like there's, because this to me also feels very clear and cut that we gave them their task to do, and they don't feel like they have direction on what the task is. So what I would like to see happen is to have them come back, clarify their task, and then if they don't want to do that work, then okay. But if
So,
their task is clarified, then we clarify it and they
I think the
move on.
task is crystal clear that they need to
But
fill
they
out
don't
this.
feel that way.
Well, no, they just don't feel like they can answer the questions. They said, in order for us to proceed, we need to answer all of these questions. We don't know how to answer them. And so, that puts it into If they don't know how to answer them, they need us to do it. I don't think we have time to do it this year, frankly. And we
Can we
would,
put them on the 10th? I get that there's a ton on
Does
the
that work for you?
26th. Can we put them on the 10th and we can revisit that if we look at what all that entails?
what, I'm just trying to gather from folks, do we wanna do it on the 10th or the 26th?
I would have preferred to do it sooner, but I could care less.
Okay,
my-
that's fine. If you
my
wanna
thought
add it
process
to
is
that.
To me, it's a 2-second conversation
Okay,
of,
okay.
Yeah, because
okay.
I'm not,
are you
I'm
not
not,
answering them because you can't answer them, or you're not answering them because you don't know you want to answer them?
and that's where my
You want
thought
us to do it.
is, the 26th won't be, all right, let's sit down and work through the worksheet with you. The 26th is gonna be, what's the issue with the worksheet? All right, if you can't do it, then we need to search somewhere else or put it on our schedule. Our schedule's full
Okay,
this year.
November 26th,
So.
if that's the intention.
Yep,
Thank you.
works for me. Okay, we need to extend just 5 minutes here to finish the meeting.
I make a
So,
motion to extend our meeting 5 minutes.
all right, second.
Second.
Any questions? No, seeing none, all in favor? Any opposition? Seeing none. All right, so looks good. We've got the December 10th, December 17th, and January budget figured out. The last thing we do need to do is, we do need to put on the calendar at some point the land use ordinance adjustment workshop that we all need to go through regarding the Durham Historic District Commission's and the lawyer's recommendations on Article 5, Section 12 and 14. We're getting into budget season. Do we want to just put that on December 10th too? Because frankly, I'd like to button up all of the discussion for this and just have it ready to go so we can pick it up after budget season and then do the hearings and be done with it.
That's fine with me.
So that would just be one that I would ask people to do. We can talk about it again on the 26th, but people just do a little bit of prep work to review the lawyer's recommendations and review the markup that they've already given us, so you can come ready to go on that, so. And,
Do we have that final version in an attachment of something?
Jerry, do you
Email?
have a markup that the Durham Historic District Commission has sent us on what they had for proposed changes to the land use ordinance? Yep, and then we have the lawyer's letter, so if you can send that to all of us, those two
Okay.
things.
And
And then-
what George's report was.
And George's report,
Yep.
and so the intent, and I wanna be crystal clear on December 10th, is not to sit down with the Durham Historic District Commission and talk about this. It's not to sit down with the town planner and talk about this, it's not to sit down with the lawyer. It's for us to work on how we wanna distill everyone's input and what actions we think need to be taken. And then, we're gonna button that up. It's not gonna get picked back up again until after the budget is taken care of, and then we have to do our mandatory public hearing for that, in the spring before the town meeting, cause it's warrant language. I just need to confirm if
You
we
gotta
can.
move, we got 3 minutes.
Yeah, I need to
Sorry.
confirm if we are able to do this whole process, or if we have to involve the planning board in this process, so. Jerry and I are gonna figure that out later. Other than that, I just wanted to get this on people's radar, so we all are a little bit more on the same page as to what's going on.
I think on December 10th, the Solid Waste Committee will have their charter finalized to present for information for the
Perfect.
select board, so we
Let's
can
put it
add
there.
that there.
Cool. Alrighty, thank you for that, Deb.
And do we need to add somewhere, we never finalized the goals for 2024, or for
Yeah.
2025 for Jerry, right? I mean,
We
we
can,
should do that.
let's put that on the 26th,
Of November?
yeah. Cause doors should be quick.
I think there's some administrative stuff that could happen ahead of that. Like, kind of last year, how we all like did our input, right, and sent it to Joe, and then Joe compiled it, gave us all the
Yeah,
opportunity to
send
review
it to me if you
Does
have
that-
input. Yeah,
so that we can kind of condense it instead of, okay?
send it to me. If you have goals and objectives you think for Jerry's work plan next year, send that to me before the 26th, and I can compile it into one concise form. Especially if there's a lot of overlap.
I'm happy to help you if
Yeah.
you need some help.
Appreciate that. All right, manager report in the last 40 seconds.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot since last meeting, I will say that Joe and I went to North Yarmouth and talked to them about their government structure and who they have for like employees and what they do, and it was a good meeting. I'm also working with MMA to get some job descriptions developed. And I'm also working on a wage table that will come
Nice.
into play with the budget. So I'm hoping that we can get this to you so you can kind of look at it, bless it, edit it, do whatever you gotta do. So working on that. Other than that, the only thing I had was the December 24th meeting. I wanted to make sure that you folks had, that it was Christmas Eve, and
Mhm.
needed to switch that. So that's all I got
Yeah.
for this week, just kind of letting you know that I'm working on the structure at town office and a wage table that I think is important.
Yeah, for all the positions, and so,
Yeah.
based off of similar things to like what we have at the state, where you have your grade and then your
Sure.
steps.
Wyndham has all their stuff online, and that's a great resource if you wanna
Yeah.
look at Wyndham's site.
So,
Lisbon does too, and North Yarmouth is very, very close to Durham in population, the whole 9 yards. You can't get more of an apples to apples kind of comparison, so.
So, any other thing from you, Jerry? Cool. Are we good with skipping board member reports for the sake of time?
Yes,
All right, and then I will take a motion to approve the consent agenda.
so moved.
Do I have a second? Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposition? Seeing none? Cool. Alrighty, upcoming meetings is gonna be planning board meeting December 4th, fire station at 6:30. Select board meeting the 26th and December 10th at the fire station at 6:30. Special public meeting November 19th at 6:30 at the Eureka Community Center.
6:45.
6:45, sorry. And then public information meeting on land use policies, November 13th at 6:30 at the fire station. No, is any executive session needed?
No, but I just did want to make a comment, Jerry, I don't know if someone's getting with you on the next solid waste meeting, it's December 9th, I think. But I don't know how that information gets to you, does the board, does the,
Chair should probably let me know.
Yeah.
okay,
yeah.
I'll send him a note to
Yeah.
tell you.
Perfect, thank you. Any executive session needed? All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Seeing no opposition? Meeting adjourned at 9.
Jerry, what are you missing?